Winterfell. They cheered. Ned mounted his horse, reached down and picked his helmet from one of the argils. He took a brief moment to examine it. Sansa and Catelyn had presented it to him before his departure so many weeks ago. The plain and sturdy design had been altered slightly. The back of the helmet leading up the peak was embossed with the outline of a weirwood. The faceplate, previously plain, now bore 3 snarling wolf heads on each cheek, one for each of his children. Ned donned it and gave a silent prayer that he could return home with it intact. He raised his arm and the troops began to move. The seriousness of the march allowed his forces to iron out their coordination and properly settle in their rhythm. Sooner than he expected, Ned saw the hovels and yards of Hookamel. A cry went up from inside the settlement. He could see the shapes of men frantically running to and fro. "Make for the beach," Ned commanded, and the army truly began to speed up. Hookamel was built at the base of a long ridge, giving them cover from the wind and rain. It was also a short distance from the shore, where Ned could see 4 longships beached next to numerous small piers. His goal was to put his men between the raiders and their ships. Arrows began flying from the hamlet, slamming into his ranks. A few pained cries quickly ended when the ranks closed tight and shields were brought to bear towards the enemy. Ned's back now faced the ocean. Sir Roderick directed their own bowmen to begin responding. The Ironborn had at most 5 or 6 archers compared to Ned's 20. Quickly, a clot of enemies streamed out of the hamlet in a strong line, shields raised to protect them. Ned had to ensure they wouldn't break. He needed to draw them out of the buildings. He dismounted his horse and passed the reins off. Better to leave his steed with the archers. "We shall advance," Ned shouted, the command taken up across the line. His formation had been set up with long, tight columns to better disguise their numbers. The dim light of the nascent sunrise hopefully would give the impression of 50 or 60 men, not 80. It appeared to be working. Their lines inched closer and closer. The occasional raider fell to an arrow. It was the Ironborn who made the first move. The bravest of their ilk broke ranks and sprinted hard forward those last few feet, slamming into the Northmen, locking the first ranks together. Shields clashed in desperate shoves with spears flashing out into fleshy gaps. Ned peered over the men and saw what he hoped were the last stragglers rush out of the hamlet to join the melee. He turned back and waved his shield. Moments later, a clear horn call echoed off the battlefield. An answering tone came from the south and quickly, the thundering of horses rose up over the battlefield. "Widen the line," Ned shouted. With strict discipline, the men at the very back of the northern blocks streamed to the left and right. The Ironborn attempted to match them, desperately attempting to stop their flanks from being hemmed in, but they had underestimated their numbers. Ned's men pushed hard into the enemy and the shield lock broke. The two forces mingled and danced in chaos. Ned and his guards did their best to stay away from the heart of the fighting but were forced to act when a group of Ironborn began to move through the left line. "For the north!" Ned cried, and led his men into the massacre. His sword quickly drenched itself and his shield was nicked and bent. He parried a clumsy thrust and opened the wielder's ribs. The Argylls were young and fresh. They cut 3 men down in as many swings. Sir Roderick was not to be outdone and cleanly disarmed a giant, roaring Ironborn then thrust his blade through the brute's lungs. With Ned present, the northern line quickly pushed back. The northern cavalry entered the fray in a frightening charge right into the side of the enemy. Men were sent flying over their comrades and armor was crushed under unrelenting hooves. The Ironborn retreated, but the survivors didn't even make it back to the shelter of the hamlet before outriders led by Roger Riswell chased them down, capturing those they could. Ned ordered the same. Captives were valuable after all. Ned suspected there had been 50 or so Ironborn left behind, of which only 8 had been taken alive. "Lord Stark!" A shout from the hamlet. Ned whipped back to track the voice's source. He saw Roger Riswell on his steed motioning to the north. Ned mounted his own horse and peered into the distance. With dread, Ned saw a trio of men looking at the town from the cliffside. Quickly they turned back to some unseen direction and waved. Dons stepped forward. Perhaps some brigands were already on their way back. Or the Glovers were caught moving earlier than we thought. If that's the case, the rest of the Ironborn may be on their way. Ned speculated. In a split second, around the far bend in the rock, A swarm of 100 screaming reavers spilled down into the field, shedding supplies as they ran. He grabbed Dons by the shoulder and ordered him to reform the archers atop the cliff face to overlook the hamlet. Into the village! Into the village! Ned screamed as he rode hard for Hukumel. His men were spread out across the entire field. They didn't have the time to merge back into line before the Ironborn were on them. Their only chance, as far as Ned could see, was to seek shelter in the hamlet. Lord Roderick had already rallied the cavalry and retreated back to the beach, to ensure the Ironborn wouldn't try to take the boats. Ned reunited with his guard just in time for the first axeman to rush into the hamlet. The Northmen had grouped together around the buildings, blunting the enemy's reckless charge. Ned cut into a man's shoulder, kicked his blade free and slammed his shield into a young man's face, destroying the boy's nose and caving in his jaw. More and more came, kicking up dirt and dust. Screams blended and thickened the air. Ned's heart was beating too fast to feel, his muscles burned as he continued to slash and stab. The mud pooled with blood as reaver after reaver fell. With a wail, Sir Roderick fell back into Ned, a spearhead jutting from his armor. Before Sir Roderick's assailant could bring his sword down for a killing blow on the unbalanced Ned, Lord Sawin intercepted. With a great cry, the Lord brought down his axe and cut clean through the brigand's elbow and then buried the weapon in his jaw. Ned and the Argylls dragged the knight into a protective circle with nearby soldiers and rejoined the fight. A whisper of steel and a guttural grunt alerted Ned someone had maneuvered behind him. He turned in time to see the mace head flying for his face, when the massive body of Moore dropped from a roof and flattened the attacker. Moore's teeth tore through the chainmail protecting the Ironborn's neck and his victim's helmet filled with blood. Moore raised his red jowls and gave a growl that sent ripples across the crimson pools at their feet. The Northmen took Moore's appearance to heart and hit back with a cheer. The narrow streets were turning against them. Ned saw they were being surrounded. Thankfully, the archers above them concentrated their volleys and a path out of the hamlet opened. Retreat to the beaches, Ned ordered. Steadily in one large mass, the northern force extracted themselves from the buildings and made for the shoreline. The chasing reavers were easy pickings for Dons and the archers. The Roswells swung their cavalry wide to the left, making room for Ned's men to fall in. The Lord of Winterfell looked upon the enemy and prepared to meet their charge when a war horn blew clean in the wind. From the same bend the Ironborn had burst from, a thrust of heavy armored cavalry emerged flying the silver gauntlet of House Glover. Together, Glover and Roswell horses pinned the reavers between them in simultaneous charges and smote the enemy in their path. The survivors either surrendered or were massacred. Ned stepped back and opened his helmet. He took a deep breath of sea air to mask the corpse stench. The battle was over. Forward slash 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 forward slash. Ned clasped hands with the nearby men, congratulating and praising even the common spearmen. Lord Sawin, I owe you my life. Ned thanked. I'm simply repaying the favor for your own actions at the Trident. Sawin refuted. Riding up to them, Ned recognized the faces of Galbart and Robert Glover. A happy reunion for all involved. The men of Deepwood Motte had liberated Till's Mill, but the Ironborn scouts had marked their approach and fled. The small folk had been rescued and the Tambra recovered. The grim task of separating the dead came next. The Northmen were lined up outside Hukumel and his captains took time to identify each body. The Ironborn were lumped together in a great heap, their clothing and possessions stripped. Of the 200 Northmen, 40 had died or would soon perish from their wounds. Lord Glover's vanguard of 100 horsemen had suffered no casualties, thankfully. Of the 160 Ironborn, only 30 prisoners remained. Most of their captives were common raiders, but 2 captains had been subdued. One had the characteristic goat belt of a good brother of Great Wyk, perhaps kin to Ned's other prisoner. The other was an older, hardier man with a look of experience mixed with pain, most likely due to his 3 missing fingers. Ned guessed this was the raid leader, judging by the expensive rings and armor found on him. With that many captives it was easy to make some talk with promises of food and medicine. Their leader was Boric Pike, a bastard son of Dunstan Drum, the lord of Old Wyk. This signified the involvement of at least 2 separate great houses of the Iron Islands. Days ticked by while riders were sent back to Swift Bank and Deepwood Motte. Camp and a makeshift triage were constructed in the meantime. Ned considered Boric and the Good Brother. Even with their confessions, there was no concrete proof that their attacks had been ordered by either of their lords. It was plausible that Bolon had nothing to do with this at all. Ned had to think carefully on his next move. On one hand, if he sent notes of ransom it could serve as an adequate threat. Bolon would need to make excuses for his vassals, and if they had been acting outside his knowledge, it could sow discord among his court. Not to be forgotten, Robert's visit was only 6 or 7 months away. Ned could simply imprison the raiders until the king's arrival. Hard proof of Iron Islanders breaking the treaty would definitely elicit a reaction from the crown. On Bolon's orders or not, Ned could use the attack as leverage to gain concessions from Robert and John Arryn. A delay would also give him time to think on what to do about Theon. Ned eventually ordered that the prisoners be split between the Glovers and Riswells and held until a later date. 3 of the longships were stripped and burnt, the last was sailed up the Salt Spear to Torrens Square for storage. As the sails of the ships burnt within sight of the stony shore, Ned thought of the busy months ahead and found relief in his swift return home. Forward slash 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 forward slash. The march back to Winterfell was delayed by the frequent happy reunions of the freed small folk with their families in the Rills and Barrowlands. Ned grimaced when he realized that yet another wave of babes will likely bear the name Ed and Eddara. He could only hope that an equal number of Rogers and Rodra balanced the trend. Not to be outdone, the joy Ned experienced as he rode through the gates of Winterfell was euphoric. His beautiful daughter and adorable son rushed into his arms, followed by his lovely wife. His family stayed firmly by his side for days on end, even when he witnessed the funerals of his fallen soldiers. Green Eyes and more were likewise inseparable for many weeks following their return. Sir Roderick slowly recovered from his wounds, finally recognizing that age had caught up to him. Ned felt compelled to acknowledge the prowess displayed by the Argylls. For his valiant command of the archers, Dons was appointed to be Roderick's successor as Master-at-Arms, to be trained until the venerable knight chose to retire. Oryn's stalwart swordsmanship earned him a full set of armor commissioned from Winterfell's own blacksmith. Lord Sewin's bravery did not go unrecognized. Meja's prize was different. A betrothal sponsored by the Starks between his heir, Clee Sewin, and Eddara Tallheart. Ned knew that Eddara herself was a charming young woman who had been a great influence on Sansa, Jane and Beth Castle. She would be a wonderful Lady Sewin. A union to connect the two houses who would hopefully be expanding the North's lumber industry by leaps and bounds. Once he was properly rested, Ned took a short trip to Moat Cailin to check in on the new road linking the moat to White Harbour. It was the first of his endeavours that would hopefully inspire other houses to take initiative. He knew from the foreman that other nobles from as far afield as the Hornwood had made visits to witness the project. He exchanged more letters with Lord Hoster and managed to negotiate for a number of riverlords to send excess labourers up the King's Road to join the growing pool of men working on the Wolfswood Canal. The canal had to be dug in stages. With the bricks and mortar being supplied by the Vale, they had plenty of time to get the excavations underway. Final dimensions approved by the architects put the canal at 4 meters wide and 2 meters deep. Enough for 2 barges to pass each other side by side and deep enough to prevent a full freeze in the winter. 600 men and their families had already settled into Wintertown from across the north. The promise of an extra income before the arrival of the next winter had attracted people from across the kingdom. All of this gave Ned hope that similar large-scale projects were not out of reach, that the right motivation and careful planning could bring the North to new heights. Months later, the royal visit loomed large in Ned's mind. He finally received another letter with the royal seal. It had been sent from Harrenhal by John Arryn. His foster father informed him that their convoy had left King's Landing with 400, not 200, labourers and their families in their wake. The royal party would meet with Lord Hoster at the Twins and arrive at Winterfell together. The extra men would not go amiss. It was fortunate that Wintertown could accommodate them and more. Time to reveal the truth of the raids on Stony Shore was fast approaching. The Ironborn had been moved down to Torrens Square. Ned planned on taking Robert and John with him to visit the ship, and there away from outside voices, Ned planned to push for serious compensation. He'd been hesitating for weeks on the honor in this act. Cregan Stark's words had pushed him forward. If Ned had been a Southern Lord Paramount, the sheer power he could have wielded with Robert on the throne was staggering. Cregan's reign in King's Landing had lasted a mere 7 days but ended with Aman Daly as Lord Regent. Winterfell had wielded strong influence during the childhood of Aegon III. Unfortunately, the many treaties and agreements made by Cregan during this time were dashed by the winter fever of 132 AC and Cregan's own abandonment of the position, though in his words, he believed that the South, especially the Faith, would have little tolerance for a Stark regent in the long term. If Ned managed to pull together even half the potential from Robert's reign that Cregan had held under Aegon III, then he could set the North on a path to prosperity for a generation to come. Ned did not want to abuse his foster brother, for he knew that Robert felt deeply and blindly. He had to reason with himself that if the Iron Islands was preparing for war, then the North would need all the support it could get. His only remaining apprehension about the approaching reunion was a note added to Jon Arryn's letter. "I shall send another letter before we cross the Twins, though doubtlessly word will travel the King's Road ahead of us. Lysa and Robin do not particularly enjoy the rigors of the road, and my aged body agrees with them. I shall look forward to the comforts of Winterfell. I also have some important news that can only be shared in the strictest confidence." Ned sat back in the safety of his castle and heard the winds blow against Winterfell's walls. Ominous words, ominous words. Forward slash 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 forward slash. Chapter 26, Beyond Truth, Lies Destiny. Chapter text. Jon awoke feeling different. His dreams had been unsettling. Flashes of fire, sunlight and screams, of white cloaks stained red, buried in hot sands. He tried to return to sleep but was too restless. His tossing and turning had woken up the other occupant of his room. Val reached an arm over and pulled him flat to the bed. Without a word she twined their legs together and promptly fell back asleep on his shoulder. This was a new development, one Jon couldn't pretend was unwelcome. Settling back in the dark, he allowed himself to relax. Raiders Band had been on Skagos for nearly 4 months, long enough to be present for Jon's 3rd anniversary on Skagos. Mance had met with the Great Shepherd multiple times. There was some distaste at first, but the two had become cordial, even somewhat friendly. Everyone now waited for them to be summoned by the children. Torrhen said he'd observed the proper customs, and his request had been heard. Without much else to do but wait, Mance and Dalla had returned beyond the wall for a brief period to reassure the free folk and keep the peace. Val and a few others had deigned to stay. Jon, as inexperienced as he was in romance, at least Jon hoped this could be called romance, knew he and Val had been circling each other for some time. Things were tense, in an exciting way, as they grew closer and closer. Val had taken his lips by surprise on a walk to the Godswood. Jon stole his own share of kisses near their spot on the pier. He'd been worried that going any further would be improper, but Val had quickly run rampant over his hesitation. She'd snuck into his room one night during a particularly loud thunderstorm. That meeting would have been very awkward if she'd been there to steal him. Thankfully they'd had their own argument about that particular custom a few days earlier. Thinking back, Jon wondered if his vehement disgust with the practice had influenced her decision. Val had snuck her way into his room not armed with a rope and gag. She'd brought a water sack and some small treats. Her proposition had been quite clear but measured. She had a knack for reading his hesitation. While she possessed the stereotypical free folk bluntness, Val was like Mance in that she demonstrated the guile and cunning a people developed when living on the edge of starvation for over 7,000 years. Discussion led to compromise. They'd mutually agreed to take things, as Val put, slower than a broken sled so as to not offend Jon's Southron sensibilities. She absolutely loved pulling that line out, always with a charming wink. Underneath all the coy jokes, Jon was immensely relieved. Val's courtship came with no expectation of Jon, either from his status as a ward of the Great Shepherd or from his family line. She certainly maintained certain standards of him, but they were built from her own preferences and based entirely on Jon. Not the bastard of Winterfell, not the student of Wolftongue, just Jon. Lord Snow as the free folk still called him. Regardless of the respect that had been drilled into him by courtly lessons and stern talks, John was a boy of 6 and 10, Val was almost 8 and 10 as far as she knew. When Bourne barged in and found Val naked and nestled underneath his pillows, the man chuckled. "I wondered if you'd be able to keep it together past the first planting season," he declared. When Mance and Dalla returned, John had been unsure of their reaction. He was, after all, a Southern kneeler. Mance had laughed his ass off, nearly choked on a rib bone at the same time. Dalla had pulled her younger sister away for the afternoon and said not a word afterwards. The dagger John had found stuck in his bedpost that evening had been warning enough. Outside of John's newfound relationship, things were in motion across the north. Word had finally reached Skagos about the bandits in the rills. John had been relieved to hear about his father's survival. Travelers coming back to the island for the New Year ceremonies said the Merman's Road was finally finished. Rumors from the coast said that Roose Bolton had taken to escorting his son everywhere. Something about an attempted assassination. Wolf Tongue would say little on the subject after returning from the Dread Fort. Rob's last letter had mentioned a strange message from Theon in White Harbor, something about meeting a distant family member. John may have disliked the Greyjoy, but he hadn't ever wished him harm. At least, harm outside a few good smacks in the training yard. A letter from Lord Stark had arrived just the other day. The initial work of digging the Wolfswood Canal was well on its way. John was anticipating his own return home. Father had decided that for King Robert's visit, the entire family should be present. He couldn't wait to reunite with all of them. He'd saved up a whole chest worth of gifts and tokens to bring back. 2 fingers tugged his ear, drawing John's gaze down to Val. "What is it?" he asked. "Where's Ghost?" she returned. He glanced around his room and saw no sign of the wolf. Frowning, John got up and looked out into the common room. A few men and women were sleeping off their hangovers from the celebration last night, but no direwolf. John turned back. Val had already begun dressing. "Odd, he usually waits for me to wake before going out," John mused while putting on his trousers. Ghost reappeared only after they broke their fast. He wasn't alone. Jogging down the path through the village was Bourne and Myra. "John, Val." Bourne called, "Where's Raider?" "Inside." Val pointed. Bourne rushed into the house, leaving Marie to watch Val sneak Ghost some choice leftovers from their plates. "What's going on, Marie?" John asked. "It's the children," Marie declared. "They've called for a meeting." Their entire group was awakened and rushed to the entrance of Vaden. Mance was nervous. He paced back and forth, lost in his own thoughts. Torren came out of the valley, dressed in full regalia. He nodded to Mance. "The time has come. We must go to one of the ancient copse on the peaks. They await us." Mance faced Dalla and his men, giving final orders and loving embraces. Torren turned to the rest of them. "You too, John. Your presence has been called for." John swallowed, gave Val and Bourne strong hugs and followed the 2 men. They walked through the valley, past Stoneheart to the cliff face that walled in the far side of the field. Torren stepped up to sheer rock, reached into 2 small inlets and pulled. A hidden door swung open. An entire entrance carved and painted to resemble the rock wall, hid a cave. Up and up, a stone stairway crisscrossed higher and higher just inside the rock. From the outside it was a normal cliff face. There was no indication of the hidden staircase within. They followed the steps, sustained by hundreds of tiny holes that brought light and air into the cave. After minutes of climbing, Torren stopped before another door. This one was ancient, made of ironwood with bronze fixtures. John was momentarily distracted by the irony of that naming. Ironwood was just a mistranslation of the old tongue name, Metalbark, by the Andals. Torren carefully swung the door open. The light of the sun blinded all 3 of them. Mance walked out of the cave without a second thought. John hesitated, waiting for Torren to proceed first. "No, John," Torren said. "The children were very clear." He frowned then. "Only the climber and the White Wolf may enter." John blinked. "I'm the White Wolf." Torren dropped his shoulders, looking at John with a rare pity and fondness. He nodded to John's feet, where Ghost finally pushed past John's knees and out through the doorway. "I doubt anyone else fits that description," Torren remarked. Taking a few cautious steps, John nodded at his mentor and walked into the sunlight. Forward slash 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 forward slash. There was sky, bright sky all around them. John and Mance stood on a small plateau high above the rest of Skagos. The flat stone under them had deep grooves, smooth from millennia of rain and wind. Despite the harsh conditions it must be exposed to day in and day out, planted in the middle of the plateau was 3 shriveled weirwoods. White bark so weathered it was dull grey. Broken branches and dead roots surrounded them. A tiny patch of soil underneath them was their only comfort. Mance looked on, fascinated. How old is this grove? The two men walked closer, drawn to the solemn grace of the trees. John noticed there were strange shapes laid out between the weirwoods. No, John realized, they weren't laid out between the weirwoods, the roots of the weirwoods went through them. Bones! John exclaimed. Mance's eyes widened. He took a careful step down into the dirt. Leaning forward, he gently drew a finger across the form, clearing the dust and rocks. Bleached bone shone underneath the filth. A curled-up skeleton with roots moving through its ribcage and knee joints. Were they buried here, under the sky? John wondered. Did the trees grow around their bodies? Mance shook his head. They were alive, he decided. The gaps in the skeleton's ribs and joints were not simply separated, they had regrown around the roots, sealing them inside the body. Such a thing required blood and breath for the body to heal. What agony it must have been. Indeed. Mance and John snapped to attention. Sitting at the center of the trees was a diminutive figure wrapped in heavy robes. At their feet was a large wooden bowl. Join me. The two hesitantly inched forward. Standing across the bowl from the stranger, John could see small bits of dark earthy skin through the gaps in their cloak. The cloak itself was not made of cloth, or any hide or fur, it was woven of moss. Sit. Each word reverberated inside of itself, layered like an echo. The child's tone was soft, surprisingly high-pitched, like a bird's call or a fox's whine. The trio sat. Mance and the child facing each other, with John between them. He looked down into the bowl and found raised channels running the interior. Curved from the rim in a large pattern swirling inwards, culminating in a single point at the bottom. Child of the forest, Mance began, I've come here as a last resort, to find guidance. Speak, climber. I am listening. Dead men walk in the far north. The others stir. Mance announced. John was frozen, he looked at Mance. Was the chieftain mad? A lunatic. The colds come down from the lands of always winter. The Thans have fled their valley. No one is left west of the Milkwater. I've gathered as many tribes as I can. You have done well, Baleman. The child complimented. Mance's face was desperate, an expression John had never seen on the always confident leader. I must save them. Except Mance quieted, I don't want to throw their lives away on a plan that won't work. What is your plan? The child asked. Get past the wall. Mance said. John's heart stilled. The wilderling was talking about invasion. He was talking about going over, around, under, going past the wall. The watch would try to stop him and they would clash. Mance was talking about killing Uncle Benjen. Before John could lash out, the child spoke, they must come south. What? John whispered. Mance took a deep breath, ignored John. How? The Lord Commander won't listen to me. Even if we managed to break through and man the wall, there's nothing to stop the Lords from coming for us. Unless the White Walkers are right in front of them, they won't heed my warnings. The child held up a clawed hand with only 4 digits and spoke. 3 things must come to pass for hope to be birthed anew. The 3-eyed crow must be freed from their sanctuary. The Skildva must retake the cursed fort, where the king in the north shall call a council of Magnus. Old grievances must be paid for and laws must be made with common cause. Then we shall have hope. Mance and John were stunned. It'll be too late. Mance lamented. I told you. The Night's Watch will massacre us before even sitting down to negotiate. Besides, there's no king in the north, there hasn't been for 300 years. Baleman, you shall bring your people south. Blood shall call to blood. The gods foretell that kin shall heed kin, no matter how distant or hidden. In the north, a king shall be crowned. The world is waking. It will not be quick, but summer wanes. You, climber, must swear here and now, before the gods to agree to these terms. If you do not, your people's corpses shall feed the army of the dead. The child declared. Mance rubbed his face in frustration. The tribes will never agree to this. They followed me because I had a plan, but the moment I start talking about negotiating with crows and kneelers, they'll abandon me. The child titled their head, "You are the king beyond the wall. I go back north and talk about this. My people will scatter. The free folk listen to me as long as I don't sound too insane." The sane ones realized that I was their only option, the rabid ones were cowed into submission. At this point, the only way the army will stay together is by assaulting the wall. However hopeless that is. It's the dream they are following, not the man. Mance confessed. "I don't believe you." John interrupted. Mance looked over at the young man. He'd been quiet ever since the child had addressed them, his direwolf sat silently at his back. John was more at ease here than Mance himself. Strange to think a chieftain's nerves would fray and a green boy's would hold steady. "I've read and listened to dozens upon dozens of stories. About magnas and kings and lords," John said. "Men who could call upon vast armies and ruled over leagues of land. I also learned about chiefs and fathers, who had one tiny hall and maybe a dozen subjects, petty kings and nothing more. Do you know what all those ancient people had in common? No matter their status or wealth." John stood, Ghost with him. When they spoke, others listened. "You can be the rightful ruler of the 7 kingdoms, or you could be a bastard. All that matters is when you speak, do people listen? That's true power, a voice that is heard." The child chuckled, "The white wolf speaks." Mance stared at John. He seemed so much taller, starker here in this stone god's wood. Taking a deep breath, Mance nodded and held out his hand. "In the name of the free folk, I agree to your terms. The white wolf shall be our witness, as kin to the king in the north, he shall bring word to Winterfell." All 3 of them leaned over the bowl. A small stone knife, some kind of strange black stone, was passed out by the child. John looked down at the blade and recalled the sword resting in Bran the Builder's crypt. He and Mance cut their thumbs and pressed the digits to the bowl lip. The child did the same, though their blood was dark and thin. The 3 trails curved along the channels, painting the bowl a dark rusted tone. They mixed together in the basin. Next, the child walked to each of the 3 weirwoods and drained a small amount of sap and added it to the basin as well. Ghost tensed and lifted his head. For the first time John could remember, Ghost howled long and loud. John's heart sped up, it hammered in his chest. His vision split. He saw himself, Mance and the child sitting beneath him. He saw Ghost howling to the sky. He saw a figure in a black, feathered cloak sitting against one of the weirwoods. John could only watch as his body moved without his consent. His eyes misted over to the milky paleness of a warg. A terrible voice emanated from John's throat. "The raider and the speaker are compact, as seen by the gods. Let it be heard from peak to pond. From hearth to grave. By earth and water. Bronze and iron. Fire and ice. A pact was made that day. It would bring fortune and doom to the realms of men. Forward slash 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 forward slash." Chapter 27, The Green Kraken. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. White Harbor, a city of bright stone and sea water. The closest Theon Greyjoy had ever been to his memories of Lord Sport. The heir to the Iron Islands had arrived in the city 6 months ago, right before Lord Stark had ridden west to the Stony Shore. His second time away from Winterfell was much more pleasant than the first. Torrens Square had been exciting, probably too exciting, Theon could admit. He had his first lessons in sailing on one of House Tallheart's small cutters. It had opened his eyes. The gentle rocking of the hull, the flutter of the flags, the sheer power he felt tug at the mainsail. It was better than any ale he'd quaffed or any woman he'd taken to bed. Maester Lewin had taught him the mechanics of sailing. Even before that, Theon could identify every part of a ship by age 10. It was another matter of actually taking the rudder and riggings in hand. His first few attempts had been embarrassing. Northmen ordered to accompany him by Lord Tallheart had felt no need to disguise their laughter. Theon got roaring drunk at the end of that first week and nearly killed one of them in the ensuing brawl. Sir Roderick had taken him in hand afterward. Rather than sail, he scrapped hulls by the docks for 4 days straight. Theon had been so desperate for an end to the chores he'd forewarn ale for the next moon, all just to get back in control of a ship. Theon preened like some prized mare as his skills grew in leaps and bounds. It was a bit like archery, Theon discovered. You had to keep aware of the environment and your own body simultaneously. The direction of the wind, the tension in the bow, even your own posture could tilt and throw the arrow before it was loose. You had to pay attention, watch the movement of the mainsail and foresail, keep abreast of the swinging rigs and keep a steady hand on the rudder at all times. Theon knew the boat also presented him with a rare gift, more than just the pleasure of navigating from the pier to the mouth of the lake. It gave him freedom. On those waves, even surrounded by men loyal to Winterfell who held their own grudges against his homeland, he could feel the freedom. No walls, no gates, just open water. Departing Torrens Square had been heartbreaking, not because the place itself engendered much love from him, though a few of the low-born sailors had become friends of a sort, but because the water was once again denied to him. Theon had been all too happy when Lord Stark decreed he'd be put under the care of the Marndalis to continue his tutelage. It also allowed Theon to reunite with Bran. The Tyke had become more excitable if that was even possible. Never a dull moment with that boy. His ego was buoyed when Bran bragged about his skills with a bow to his gaggle of squire friends. White Harbour was 100 times larger than Torrens Square. Living there felt like stepping into a foreign land. Snowstep Market rang clear with a dozen languages and people of all colors and kin. 3 separate harbors led into the city proper, each overseen by a separate dockmaster. Ships anchored and set sail every day, sometimes it was every hour. Taverns, storehouses, workshops, they stayed open until the last slivers of daylight fled and reopened at the first rays of dawn. He'd been awestruck. Even more so when the sheer enormity of the city meant that very few recognized or knew him. Lord Marndaly had received him cordially but quickly handed him off to a trusted man in his service, Sir Bellis Fit, an older knight sworn to House Marndaly. Sir Fit earned his knighthood as a ship captain, protecting northern trade interests and fighting pirates in the narrow sea. His most distinguishing feature was the bronze, acorn hue of his skin. Theon had seen many Essozi merchants and sailors in his short time at White Harbour. Bran had excitedly explained that many people born across the sea lived here and had for generations. Sir Bellis was the son of a northern noblewoman and a bravo sea craftsman. His father's line had been sewing sails in the north since the reign of Aegon the Unlikely. His mother was descended from Stormlanders, who left Cape Wrath during the Dance of Dragons. Sir Bellis was a stoic man, though he had a soft spot for song and dance. Theon was quartered at his modest house near the eastern harbour. Every day Theon would accompany him as he walked the docks and ensured taxes and dues were paid promptly and correctly by new arrivals. Once every week, Theon was brought to a ship that sailed for the Marndalis, and a Bojan would teach him the intricacies of the larger cogs and galleys. These vessels carried crews from as little as 50 souls to 300 or even 400. Sailing them required skills similar to a battlefield commander, not a cutter's simple rigging and navigation. Dozens of rowers kept in perfect synchronicity, lookouts and cooks scrambled to finish a list of essential tasks while bowmen and soldiers stood ever ready for a sudden attack. It took little to sow confusion between the decks and throw the entire vessel out of order. In his 4th month, Theon was accompanied by Sir Bellis for a short trip away from the city. He was to act as an assistant Bojan on a mid-sized galley that was doing the rounds in the Bight, checking for pirate hideaways and smuggler caches. It was thrilling. Music, Theon thought, the working of a well-crewed ship was like a band of bards singing in concert. He smiled from start to finish and even offered to treat Sir Bellis to dinner in a dockside kitchen when they returned to White Harbour. Fine, fine. Only if you hold your ale, Theon, I won't make excuses if you sleep through morning rounds, Bellis told him. Theon pulled off his thick coat. The Bight was never warm, even during summer. 1 drink, I swear. I just need something warm in my belly right now, Theon said as he led them down the pier. They nearly stepped back into the busy streets when Bellies stopped and shouted, "Ho there! Captain Shelseen." Theon turned back and saw his caretaker trot down to the dockmaster's hut. Theon rolled his eyes and dutifully followed. He saw a thin man in a thick coat turn around and step entirely out of the hut. Short-cut light brown hair laid over thin spindly eyebrows set on an old lean face, and faded patches of scars spread across his wrinkled chin, like he'd fallen into a fire. His hair was a solid color, but his mustache and sideburns were thick and gray. This man was aged, probably as old as Maester Lewin by his looks. Even from a distance, Theon could see large rings glinting on the man's hands. A short axe hung from his belt, and a dagger stuck out of his boot. Bellies locked arms with the stranger, though obviously, he was no stranger to the knight himself. "Shelseen, I thought you were still in Dawn?" Sir Bellies asked. "You know how things go, Fit. The tide comes in with one contract, then the tide goes out with another." Shelseen replied. "I had a feeling the man who hired me was in bad favor with some powerful people." There was a familiar tone to the man's words. A rhythm in his speech rang familiar to Theon's ears. "I threw his coin back in his face and left Sunspear the same night." Shelseen smirked. "A friend from WYL says he was brought up on charges by the Martells not 2 moons later. Found good sport hunting slavers for the Uranwoods in the meantime." Bellies shook his head. "Where you get your feelings, I'll never know." Shelseen tapped a fist to his chest. "I've said it before, the drowned god favors the clever swimmers and drowns the dumb ones." Theon's eyes grew wide. The voice was familiar because it carried the tones of his home. It had been a point of pride for Theon to never lose his mother tongue. His own voice carried those vowels and rolls. "Who's your tag-along?" the Ironborn captain asked. "He looks familiar." "Don't stand there with your mouth open. You'll catch a ton of salt." Shelseen stared hard at Theon, who found words hard to come by. Sir Bellies waited for the young man to introduce himself. "Do you know your father, boy?" Shelseen questioned. Theon stuttered. "Was he some poor sell-sail in the south?" Theon frowned. "Why would you think that?" Shelseen shrugged. "I've killed a lot of piss-poor sailors in the south. Sometimes their faces stick in my mind. Thought your father might be one of them." Theon's pride reared its head, and he stomped forward. He was nearly tall as the old man he was about to threaten. "I'll have you know, sea dog, that my father is the Lord of the Iron Islands." Theon grinned toothily, ready for the man to shit his breeches when he realized he'd insulted his liege lord. Shelseen locked eyes with Theon. "You're Balon Greyjoy's the idiot's last son." Theon stepped back and swallowed. "You'll watch your tongue. I'm the heir to Pike. Show some proper respect to the Lord Reaper." "I'll show respect to Balon Greyjoy when he goes to the drowned god's halls. Him and all his up-jumped fool brothers," Shelseen declared and spit. "Wasting all of what good Lord Quayan gave them. The way I look at it, Balon deserved the sword but got an idiot's mercy instead. You're just lucky the stag didn't decide your head was a fitting trophy." Theon's own thoughts were thrown off by the second comment. "Quayan. My grandfather." Sir Basil cut in, eager to avoid a knife fight on the quay. "Theon Greyjoy, this is Captain Harmond Shelseen. He's a frequent visitor in White Harbor, and has more than a few friends here," Basil warned. "Let's keep things civil. No need for countrymen to shed blood over strong words." Shelseen had relaxed. His hand fell away from his belt. "I was a bit hasty," he admitted. "It does me no favors to scorn the blood of my late lord for the actions of another." Captain Harmond held out his arm. "Peace, Theon Greyjoy." Theon bit his cheek. The last year had done wonders for his own self-control. Apart from the occasional embarrassing episode, like what just happened. This was the first Ironborn he'd met in the north. Their trade ships kept to Dawn and the Stormlands, rarely venturing further north than Cape Crooken. Theon was forbidden from writing to the islands, so this was his first real chance for news from home. He stepped forward and joined arms with the captain. "My insults were misplaced," Theon said. "If you agree, Sir Fit and I are going to sup nearby. Would you join us?" "Lead the way," the captain said. The trio found a comely tavern near the wharf with enough free space for quiet conversation. Shelcine ordered food and ale while Theon asked for watered-down wine alongside his usual fare. Sir Basil spoke with the tavern owner. Apparently, the man had some issue with late shipments and wanted to get Basil's opinion. Unsure of how to begin, Theon allowed Harmond to take up the burden of speaking first. "I heard you were a ward of Lord Stark," Harmond said. Theon took a bite of bread. "I am. Lord Eddard deemed it time I learn the ways of the sea. He's sent me to the Mondaelis for the time being. Sir Fit has been overseeing me. Honesty seemed the best option for now." Harmond simply nodded and took a bite of his chicken. "Basil's a smart man. A good knight, even better captain. He's seen nearly every port in Westeros more than once." "And you?" Theon asked. "Am I a good captain?" "No, have you seen every port in Westeros? I thought iron-born ships kept to the south these days." Harmond frowned. "These days, I suppose they do. Then again, I have the benefit of a long history with most of the ports on the mainland. I've been sailing them since before Robert's Rebellion. A good reputation opens more doors than you'd think." "Did you fight for my grandfather?" Theon wondered. "During the King's Rebellion?" Harmond cleaned his hands and blinked hard. "I did. Longer than just in the rebellion. I was by your grandfather's side during the War of the Ninepenny Kings too." Theon leaned forward. "Did you know my grandfather?" "Truly know him?" There was a tone of true familiarity in Harmond's words. Harmond downed his ale. "I did, since we were boys. You've given your name Greyjoy. It's only fair I give mine." Harmond toasted. "I am Harmond Merlin, pleasure to meet you." "Merlin?" Theon muttered. "As in Merlin of Pebbleton?" "The very same. My fat nephew holds court in Pebbleton Tower as we speak." Harmond confirmed. "Then what are you doing here?" Theon asked. "What any smart exile does, keeping my coffers full and my life intact." "You're an exile?" Theon exclaimed. Harmond smiled wide. "Have been going on 15 years. If that's true, then you never fought for my father." Theon realized. "No, but I will say I never raised sail against him. I'm no faithless kinslayer," Harmond informed him. Theon rubbed his cheek. "If you're Lord Merlin's kin, then that means you're the son of Saigon Merlin, my great-grand-uncle." Harmond chuckled. "You know your lineage. My mother was Quayen's aunt. We were cousins. That makes us kin, Theon, for whatever that's worth." Theon stared blankly at the old man. The first family he'd spoken to since he was a child, and he was a banished exile. He smiled bitterly. "You can't go home. Guess we have that in common." Harmond set down his food and examined the boy across from him. "If it's worth anything, in a way, I chose my exile. My brother died in the same battle that took your grandfather's life. When we returned to the islands, I tried to take control of House Merlin. You tried to usurp your nephew's birthright." Theon clarified. "The idiot wasn't half the man his father was. I didn't want to let that oaf take the title, nearly succeeded too. But he was on friendly terms with the new Lord Bolon, and he whispered in your father's ears about how I was weak. Pointed out how loyal I'd been to Quayen. As if that was some kind of black mark on my soul." Harmond growled. "Then your uncle Aaron became a priest," he added his voice to my nephew's. "I could have stayed and fought." "Why didn't you?" Theon asked. Harmond refilled his mug and drank. "I could see the course of the tide. Quayen's ways were discarded by Bolon. I decided I didn't want any part of his obsession with the old ways. I took my ship and left, thank the drowned god. Few years later, I'm docked in Volantis when news about the Greyjoy rebellion arrives." Harmond shook his head. Theon looked over and saw Sir Fit had ordered his meal and sat near the door. The knight was leaving them to their conversation. "Very kind of him." "I don't understand," Theon said. "My father was following the old way, just like my grandfather." Harmond squinted. "What were you told about Quayen?" Theon toyed with his fork. "Not much. My older brothers mentioned how he was strong and tall. They said he died like a true Ironborn, on the sea with a blade in hand. I don't think father ever talked about him. At least not to me, but I was a child." Theon rarely spoke about his oldest memories. He was only 10 years old when Pike was attacked. Before that, he recalled spending his time with Asher and their nursemaid. Father rarely spoke with them. His older brothers, Roderick and Maron, occasionally visited him, but they spent their time lying and playing tricks. They were cruel, especially to Asher. He remembered that very clearly. He never said it, but when news came that Roderick had died at Seaguard, he'd been relieved. Theon only learned months after being taken from Pike that Maron had also died on the battlements. Some said he was crushed by a tower, but Lord Umber claimed one of his men had killed him first. That was all in the past, though. Harmond was right. Lord Quavian was barely mentioned in his memories. Of course not. Boulogne and Victorian thought he was a fool, that he was weakening the Iron Islands. Harmond insisted. What did he do? Theon asked. Harmond stood up and pulled his stool close to Theon, shoulder to shoulder. Quavian had the strength to conquer but the mind to rule, Harmond said. He looked to history, saw the difference between when the Ironborn were strong and when we were weak. That's why he tried to end the old way. Theon frowned. End the old way? How could that help us? We do not sow, we pay the iron price. It's what made the Ironborn a force to be feared. Harmond kept still. What is the old way, Theon? Theon thought back on the earliest of his lessons. What you need, you take, with ship and sword. What you want, you take, whether it's coins or women. Ironborn have salt in their blood. We're meant for more than farming and mining. We pay the iron price because the gold price is paid by lesser men. That's why no one can beat an Ironborn at sea. We are the children of the drowned god, made fiercer and harder than any other men, Theon recited. Did it look that way when King Robert broke through Pike's walls? Harmond asked. Before Theon could respond, Harmond continued, when were the Iron Islands at their strongest? Who was the last lord to lead our fleet to true glory and bounty? The Red Kraken, Theon responded. He sacked Lannisport and conquered Case and Fair Isle, like the Driftwood kings of old. Dalton Greyjoy ruled for 5 years before dying in his bed. Then the Lannisters took their vengeance while his salt sons squabbled over his title, Harmond countered. Theon thought back but could not name anyone outside of folk heroes who made the occasional daring raid. When the Targaryens came, they gelded the Ironborn with their claws, Harmond stated. The Whores. They ruled for thousands of years, conquerors who were feared across Westeros, like Harren the Black. Theon pointed out. Our kingdom stretched from sea to sea. The Whores didn't practice the old ways, did they? Harmond reminded. They married Andals, lived on the mainland, forbade reaving, even killed priests. Before them, were the Greyrons. The Whores spent their first centuries regaining the power the Greyrons lost. After Torgon Latecomer abolished the King's Moot, they couldn't figure out how to overcome Andal castles or beat Andal steel, Harmond lectured. Even before that, the High Kingship shifted hands like a scalding cup. You can track which kings tried to build something and which kings wasted those efforts. Theon felt unbalanced. I don't understand. Harmond laid a hand on Theon's shoulder. Your father and his brothers, they grew up under Lord Quavian's reign. He made many changes and brought wealth to the islands. He sent reavers away from Westeros, sponsored traders to every port that would take them. With coin and goods flowing back to the islands, he brought maesters to teach and heal, encouraged his lords to take wives from the mainlands, all to tie us closer to the rest of Westeros. He realized that the wealth of the Whores was in reach and without having to worry about thrall uprisings or invasions from the Lord Paramounts. Harmond paused, his eyes downturned. In those days, a lord could take a shipload of iron to the Reach, fight pirates in the Stepstones, come back with enough silver to buy a hull's worth of northern timber and build another ship. Your father and his brothers grew up with great feasts and riches. Rather than realize how hard your grandfather worked, they listened to old men in the taverns who crowed and caught about the old ways, of the golden age of the Ironborn. When men had 100 salt wives each and took thralls and gold with every tide, when mainlanders quaked in fear at the sight of the Kraken and threw their wives to the waves in tribute. Those old fools spoke of a time that never was, that they'd never seen. Only heard about, from other old men. Boulogne was all too eager to take Quavian's place and replace the new ways, to go back to tradition. What then? Theon asked. How did that lead to his rebellion? Harmond sank back, the wealth drained away. No one wants to trade with a slaver, and make no mistake, that's what thralls are to the rest of the world. Why give goods and supplies to a captain who'd just as likely kill you a week later? The Westerlands and the Reach have come to the islands to burn and sack before. They know what the old way means. So when Bolon started cutting off trade and Ironborn stopped going to Essos, the kingdoms shut their doors. Bolon panicked. After all, this was not the golden age he was promised. He turned to the drowned god, hoping for some kind of divine solution, some sign. The priests were all too eager to have his ear. Priests always want for power, for kings to bow and scrape at their feet. Men like Aaron Damfair have never forgotten that holy men crowned the first High King. Bolon convinced himself that if he wore a crown, his problems would disappear. Theon ran a hand through his hair. That makes no sense. Without the king's peace, we'd have no protection. Harmond nodded. Bolon thought that if he severed the ties to the Iron Throne, the sheep of the mainland would shriek in terror. That's the poison of the old way. It makes men feel like gods by virtue of sharing a name with dead heroes. Theon could only stare off. I guess he learned his lesson at Fair Isle. A man like Bolon never learns. The Iron Islands are the weakest they've been in centuries. Harmond said. Theon swallowed thickly. The old way says that mainlanders are lessers, not worth respect. Harmond squeezed his shoulder. That's right. Theon dared not ask what his father would think of him. A boy raised by the Starks, in a castle, with no crew or wealth of his own. It hadn't seemed strange how he was raised. It was similar to Robb, after all. Perhaps that was the worst part. That Theon was brought up like a Greenlander and not an Ironborn. How can I be lord of a land I don't understand? Theon asked himself. He was so intent on his cup of wine he barely noticed Harmond stand up and walk over to Sufit. Their talk was hushed. Harmond passed over a small sack of coin and clasped hands with his old comrade. Harmond marched over to Theon, hauled him up by his arm, and hugged him. Theon came out of his fugue long enough to stare at the old man in bewilderment. I think you and I have more to talk about. Besides, Harmond laughed as he pulled Theon alongside him out of the tavern. A Greyjoy should learn to sail from trusted kin, not strangers. Theon looked back. Sufit was watching them walk away. The knight gave a quick wave and went off toward his home. My first mate went and got himself married, and now with his wife expecting he's taken a post in Gulltown, that means I've got a hole in my crew, Harmond explained. You want me to be your first mate? Theon asked. Harmond laughed again, his wrinkled cheeks curled. Maybe not first mate, apprentice sounds better. Once you've learned your way around the mast, we'll see. Theon looked down the dock they were on and saw a grand ship swaying in the afternoon breeze. Men swarmed up and off it. Theon protested, I can't just go with you. I need Lord Stark's permission. Worry not. Sufit will keep his mouth shut, and we'll make port often enough to not raise suspicions. In the meantime, you have a lot to learn. Harmond declared. He walked up the gangplank, hopped onto the rail of his foredeck, and threw his arms wide. Welcome aboard the host, my kinsman. She'll be glad to have you. Theon stared in shock, then smiled wide and took his first steps on board. // Notes. /N. Hope everyone enjoyed this chapter. I've decided on a course for Theon, but I needed an OC to get him started. You might also realize that this chapter is a bit of a rant on my part about the Ironborn. I couldn't help myself. The next chapter will take us to the start of canon, in 298 AC, with the arrival of King Robert to Winterfell. Chapter 28, Tend the Hearth. Chapter text. Overcast skies colored the world grey. Ned sat on his steed watching a group of riders approach. 3 were armored, the 4th wore a ragged, motley black cloak and his hands were tied to the saddle. A deserter of the Night's Watch. Caught trying to forage in the Wolf's Wood. Apparently, he'd come easily. The message mentioned some strange ravings and mumbling. It was not the first deserter Ned had executed, he doubted it would be the last. They proceeded quickly to Head Hill, a clean, solemn place that he preferred for the block. No need for crowds and speeches. He dismounted and accepted ice from Jory. The man had grey in his beard, no ears, and was missing the pinky on his left hand. Now off the road, he could make out more of the deserter's words. Pale, pale, glass heart, glass hands, blue, so cold, ice in the heart, white shadow, the deserter whispered. In the oldest of the histories, the written accounts were merely transcriptions of ancient stories and family tales. Those words echoed the legends of the White Walkers, of Bourne's own description of the others from the long night. Ned knew his ancestors had fought something ancient, something terrible. No one built something like the wall to fight men in furs. The existence of wargs and Greenside proved that the old legends were not completely false. Bourne's tales of giants atop mammoths in the deep north were further proof. Ned himself had felt the magic of the Weirwoods, in the tomb of Bran the Builder, when his blood and words opened a gate of roots. The truth behind the legend of Bran had turned Ned into a believer. The son of a first man-king and a child of the forest. Bran the Builder, the first Green Seer, who had united Westeros and fought for 20 years against the others. In some places memories ran long, and who was he to deny them? He could still recite the vows he'd taken before the Builder's crypt. When the wall shakes and kings cry, the walkers shall claim all our lives. Take heart in each other, let no creed shatter your ties. The lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. Not to mention the strange vision he'd seen afterwards. The old man who called him Ian Furwolf, Wolf Father, called him the turning point. That had not been a warning to pass down for some future generation, that had the air of foresight and prophecy. He'd been commanded to rule wisely and to look to the wall when winter came. 3 years had passed since that night in the Godswood. Ned had tried his best to rule wisely and strengthen the north. It had been easy to push concerns about ancient ice demons to the side when practical concerns arose. Now though, Ned was thinking more and more on the long summer, and the long winter he knew would follow. He would need to speak with Bourne on the matter when he returned with Jon. Ned set ice aside and knelt by the deserter. He knew not if the man understood the old tongue, but even young Rickon could be calmed by it after nightmares. Freffer, Skildva, Ned said. What is your name? The shivering hands and quaking breaths calmed, steadied. Looking up from the ground, the watchman seemed to find clarity. Guard, he answered. What is your last request? Ned asked. The deserter exhaled a deep breath that seemed to mist the air between them. Godswood, the Oathbreaker muttered, Godswood. Ned ordered a minor detour. He knew there was a small Godswood closer to Castle Sewin. They made good time and arrived there just before sundown. His guards sternly directed the deserter to his knees before a heart tree bearing a sad face. The deserter made his first motion of his own volition. His hand crept up to his collar and pulled off a small necklace. His trembling had ceased, shoulders relaxed. Guard looked at Ned and held the necklace out. Ned took it. A simple leather cord adorned with a small, dull pearl. The Lord of Winterfell motioned and Guard was bent over the stump. Ned raised ice and tensed. Before the blade descended, Guard shut his eyes and spoke, loudly and clearly. Winter is coming, the dead man pronounced. Ice fell, a head rolled and vibrant blood watered the weirwood. A shudder ran through Ned's spine and he felt the wind churn. Guard's body was wrapped. He'd be burned and his ashes sent to the wall for Commander Mormont. Turning back to Winterfell, Ned was thankful his own children would be returning soon. Robert was set to arrive in 2 weeks. It would be good to have his home full again. // A fine brown horse trotted up the road. A young boy sat confidently in its saddle, running along his coat were small wolf designs. He smiled and looked down the King's Road. There within sight was the tall walls of his home. Careful, Lord Bran, a man shouted. Bran looked back to see the large form of Sir Willis Marndaly, the heir of White Harbour. Sir Willis and his fellow knights were rushing to catch up to him. Bran knew he was supposed to stay close, but he was too anxious. It had been nearly a year since he visited home and now he was back to stay. Dutifully waiting, Bran twisted the reins in his hands. One of the men unfurled the direwolf banner father had sent with him and at last Bran arrived home. Winterfell was just as he remembered it. The castle paused to take notice of the new arrivals. Bran jumped from his saddle and rushed into his mother's arms. Catelyn embraced her son tightly. She also put a hand out to give Summer his own fair share of attention. A delighted scream from the keep heralded Rickon and Shaggy's entrance. Bran answered dozens of questions while Summer and Shaggy roughhoused in reunion. Father came from the Godswood and joined in the embrace. Bran was so excited he ran out of breath trying to shove words through his mouth. He finally calmed down enough to realize he'd broken some very important manners. "Father, Mother, may I present Lord Willis Marndale," Bran belatedly introduced. The merman's son was gracious and forgiving. He traded pleasantries with Father, made arrangements for Bran's baggage, and went off to arrange his quarters. With his breath back, Bran talked his parents' ears off about all things he'd seen and done. After his 10th name day, Lord Wyman declared he was big enough to begin riding the larger horses. He'd even been given his first lance. Lifesteal was still a ways off. He'd made a dozen new friends, many of them squires, many of them Marndales. Father looked satisfied that he'd been treated well. He spoke until well after dinner. As night neared, Bran pulled up the courage to ask another question, a more serious question. "Mother, am I going to marry Wyler?" Bran asked. Mother blinked, glanced to Father, then back to him. "My dear," she smiled, "that's nothing to be worrying about right now." Bran bit his lip, "But everyone else is getting married, why not me?" "Rickon isn't betrothed," Father pointed out. "Rickon's a baby," Bran pointed out. His mother brushed his hair back and forth. A familiar, comforting gesture. "Nothing is set in stone yet, son," Father told him. "You're our fourth-born, that means we have more time to find a wife for you." Bran frowned. "All right. Are you happy being Lord Willis' squire?" Mother asked. Bran smiled wide. "It's very fun, I'm learning a lot. Though I did want to ask if I could go south and see a real tourney. The Marndales hold just small contests." Mother laughed. "One day we'll go down to Riverrun, or perhaps to the Vale, and see a truly grand tourney." Bran hugged his parents and reveled in the warmth of Winterfell. Forward slash 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 forward slash. The next day Arya arrived back in a clatter of hooves and shouts. She and Gawain were halfway to racing through Winterfell's main gate. Daisy Mormont and Galbart Glover followed in their wake at a more sedate pace. Arya herself had not one but 3 wolves nipping at her heels. Birina was large enough to tumble with her siblings, but the 2 normal wolves with her had to be careful. Ned himself saw Birina chase off Shaggy when he decided Varys and Aera would make good playmates. Green Eyes and More thankfully accommodated their presence. Catelyn had gone wide-eyed at her daughter's dress, for it was a dress. Arya was decked out in Mormont-style clothing. Thick fur cloak over a heavy hide skirt with sturdy boots and a simple but well-adorned corset. Her hair was pulled back with elegant bronze and iron clasps. Around her wrist was a silver bracelet, with slight impressions of a gauntlet, a gift from Lady Sybil for her last name day. Catelyn admitted the style suited Arya much better than the typical gowns and oils she and Sansa preferred. There was a very teary reunion. Arya had seemed less eager to return from Deepwood Motte, though she had frequently sent letters and Catelyn had travelled to visit her there at the turn of the new year. Still, having her back in Winterfell proper was a comfort. It was also reassuring to see Arya and Gawain were good friends. Arya was still young and excitable, but Catelyn found her daughter was not so resistant to ceremony or the duties of a lady. Sybil's daughter, Irina, featured prominently in Arya's stories. She and Gawain had been glued to the child for months, fascinated by every new feat or achievement. She'd even been proud to show off a stitching she'd added to her own cloak, a lining of tiny wolves and a girl running. The next morning, Arya had joined Catelyn in the sewing room. Her wild child had hesitantly unveiled a secret gift. A wonderful fur shawl, and across the back, Arya had painstakingly embroidered a trout jumping over Winterfell. "Now no one can forget that you're the Lady of the North," Arya proclaimed. Arya's grand smile was swiftly replaced with worry when Catelyn burst into joyful tears. Forward slash 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 forward slash. Sansa's absence from Winterfell was much shorter. She'd gone to visit Small Janumber at Last Hearth with Jane and Beth Castle. It had been an interesting few weeks, getting to know Small Jan and his relatives. Sansa had been impressed by her future home. Last Hearth was as giant as its lords, set upon a high crag overlooking the woods around it. She'd done her best to learn its way and patterns, like how she now knew Winterfell's. Time would tell how happy she would be there, but as the seat of the Umbers since times unknown, it did not lack comfort or safety. Small Jan, his aunt by marriage, Shor, and great-uncle Mors returned to Winterfell with her. Outside of official duties, Sansa had absorbed many new songs and dances from the residents of Last Hearth. Upon her arrival back home, she presented Bran with a new poem called The Wolf Knight. For Arya she gifted a painting, a recent hobby, of Birena and Lady standing together on a mountain top, overlooking a field of blue roses. Her gifts for father and mother weren't ready yet. She was waiting for Maester Lewin's help on researching the history of the Tullys before the Andal invasion. For now she was swept up with tasks helping the castle prepare for the king's arrival. // Robb's arrival came with as much fanfare. Only a quick visit after the battles with the Brookbirths was all the heir of Winterfell had, in his 3 years gone. No one could quite believe how much he'd grown. His betrothed Aelys Karstark and her brother Eddard had come as well. Eddard and Daisy Mormont were in the earliest stages of their own betrothal. With their homes so far apart, their parents had agreed to an official meeting between the prospective pair in Winterfell, under the watchful eyes of Lord and Lady Stark. The eldest son of the Starks was overjoyed to see his siblings again. He spent his time riding with Bran and Arya, playing with Rickon in the keep, and describing all he'd seen and heard to Sansa. Robb had also taken the time to meet privately with his father, to inform him about the sudden decline in wilderling raids coming past the wall. Worrying news, that had to be put aside for the duration of the royal visit. // Ned paced nervously in his solar. From the latest ravens, Robert had crossed the neck and passed through Moat Cailin. Their arrival was imminent. Winterfell was about to host the first king since Jaehaerys the Wise and Jon was still absent. He wanted to have no surprises or unexpected turns. He already ordered for the Ironborn prisoners to be moved to Torrens Square. A knock on his door revealed Robb smiling widely. Jon's arrived. The whole family assembled in the courtyard. Green Eyes had been restless for days, barely tolerating anyone except Catelyn. Mor and Crag had kept well away, while the pups remained with the children. A cry from the battlement heralded riders cantering in. Ned recognized Bourne immediately. The man had grown a beard but looked healthy otherwise. Behind him was a woman. He guessed it was Bourne's sister by their shared features. Bringing up the rear was Jon and a woman. All four wore green cloaks. Jon dismounted and led his party forward. "Lord Stark, I have returned," his son gravely declared as he bowed. Ned stepped forward and pulled him close. "I'm glad to have you back, Jon." Jon returned his embrace and whispered, "We must talk later, I have grave news." His other children then dragged Jon away into a pile. Ghost likewise barreled forward into his packmates, kicking up dirt as they ran into the Godswood. Ned looked to his other guests and clasped hands with Bourne. "Welcome back to Winterfell, cousin. It's good to be back, my lord. Hopefully, I'm here to stay," Bourne said. "Let me introduce you to my sister, Marie Skytongue." Marie approached with all courtesy and manners. Someone had taken care to teach her the ways of highborns. "Lord Stark, it is truly an honor," Marie said. "The honor is mine. I'm always happy to welcome distant family home. I hope you'll consider this a safe haven for you and yours," Ned responded. Marie smiled and followed Bourne to be introduced to Catelyn and the other Starks. Awkwardly, that left Ned face to face with the striking blonde woman who was looking about with confusion. Beneath her green cloak was well-worn travel clothes and a wicked knife at her side. "And you are, my lady?" Ned asked. "Val," she curtly replied. Jon broke from Arya and Bran's chatter to come to the rescue. He walked forward and gently rubbed Val's arm while whispering in her ear. Ned watched Val visibly untense and then bow shallowly. "John, would you introduce us?" Ned asked. "Of course, father, this is Val, this my father, Lord Eddard Stark, Warden of the North," John introduced. Very quickly all four of them were brought into the great hall to offer Marie and Val bread and salt. They had ridden hard from White Harbor. As they shed their cloaks to sit, Bran pointed to John's belt and exclaimed, "You have a mask like Bourne." Arya leaped up, "Are you a shepherd, John?" John glanced at Bourne and Marie. "I suppose I am," he admitted. Ned leaned back. He was surprised but not nearly as shocked as the rest of the table. "John has proven himself to not just the great shepherd but a great many others," Bourne complimented. "Before we left Skagos your son was granted his mask. There's not much ceremony involved in becoming a shepherd, simply elders willing to vouch for you. John had many who spoke for him. He has made a good name for himself on the island." Ned smiled brightly at John, who tried his best to hide his blush. Dinner was full of laughter and stories. The children had dozens of questions and accomplishments to share with Bourne. Sansa and Robb drew Marie into conversation. Ned was glad they were taking the initiative to include her. That night, Ned and John met in his solar. The fire was low and the wine was warm. Ned took in John, the strength in his shoulders, the lack of stress in his cheeks, the scars on his forehead. Skagos was a unique place by John's tales. Wild in both its nature and people, though there seemed to have been some development since the rebellion of the Stone King in centuries past. And then the voice spoke from my throat and declared the pact had been witnessed. John finished recounting his harrowing tale. Ned refilled their goblets and took time to absorb it all. Wildlings, or free folk he supposed, uniting together. 100,000 men, women and children, willing to face the wrath of the Starks all to get south. Even the kings beyond the wall like the Horned King or Bael the Bard had brought warriors south, not their families and livestock. Led by a deserter of the Night's Watch, who doubtlessly would share the weakness of his old brotherhood. Ned knew that at the moment the Watch's greatest defense was the sheer obstacle of the wall, but less than 1,000 men would inevitably fall. Especially, against an enemy fighting for their existence. The others, White Walkers, the whispers of the deserter guard had not been hollow after all. Were they already marching? If Raider was to be believed, then the abominations had started creating whites, those desecrations of the dead. According to John, the shepherds had begun mobilizing en masse. Messages were already being sent. The small folk would not wait for the lords to realize danger approached. He knew from the books that often the shepherds would begin the preparations for winter. The citadel liked to believe they alone could predict the turning of the seasons. As if the small folk were blind and deaf to the ways of the world. Ned would need to consult the histories and visit the local villages and hold fasts. He could clearly remember his grandfather joking that a maester would need 3 weeks and a ream of calculations to determine when a river would flood, where a farmer would need a yardstick and an old story. "Father, what about the child's commands?" John asked. "A fair question. What was the three-eyed crow? Whose responsibility was it to free it? Mance Raider. John and Ned. Moreover, how could he convince the Night's Watch, let alone his lords, to allow the wildlings south? What bothers me most is the reference to the king in the north," Ned admitted. John stared into the fire. Could it mean King Robert? Perhaps, Ned murmured. "I could leave for the wall right away," John began. "No, I need you close by. Robb may need your support while I'm away from the castle," Ned explained. John wanted to argue, but conceded in the end. "How will you explain Marie and Bourne? Someone will notice the similarities between them and us," John pointed out. Ned leaned over to his side table and pulled out a small sheaf of paper, bearing a detailed family tree of House Stark. Ned pointed to Birena Stark's name beside their own ancestor Willam Stark. New lines had been added below her, connecting her to Bourne's great-grandfather, Coles, then to Torren and finally Marie and Bourne. They had all been labeled under House Wolftongue. "I'll say that there had been a rift between our families that I mended after the rebellion. No one will question some Stark cousins from near the Bay of Seals," Ned said. "What we may need to explain is Val's presence." John was again flustered. He cleared his throat and wiped his forehead. "Technically, I married her." Ned lost grip on his goblet and wine spilled in his lap. As his son rushed to grab some kind of cloth, the Lord of Winterfell could only lament how little sleep he would be getting that night. forward slash 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 forward slash. Chapter 29, The Royal Stag. Chapter text. John was married to a wilderling. At least according to their customs. A Stark married to a wilderling. It sounded like a bad tavern tune, or perhaps Bale the Bard's Revenge from Beyond. That was uncharitable. Val was pleasant and cordial. It was evident she found Winterfell strange, though she was coping better than he'd imagined. Naturally, he told Cat. His wife's first thought had been of fear. Could this woman be trusted in their home? Val had accepted guest right, so it was unlikely. Not to mention, she was Mance Rayder's good sister. Her presence did confirm the king beyond the wall was committed to his oath. Sending kin to the heart of his historical enemy was a bold statement, even if none other than Ned knew it. Luckily, their other guests assumed that Val was either a shepherd, or a companion of Marie's from Skagos. It had been awkward when he escorted John back to his chambers, only to find her curled up under his son's furs. He permitted John to stumble through an explanation. Val returned to her shared bedroom with Marie. His son promised that even if she returned later, he would send her away. A valiant oath from a young man, and unfortunately one Ned didn't quite believe. The revelations shared in Ned's solo were put to the side at the first sight of the crowned stag on the horizon. The visitors from the south numbered well over 700. Ned had thankfully prepared for this. When they came up the King's Road, Lord Sewin met them and took the reins of organizing the laborers and their families. They'd be sorted by trade. Most of the families and craftsmen would be sent on to Wintertown, while the laborers would join the existing camps near the canal. Guards in Baratheon, Arryn and Lannister colors marched through the courtyard, the stag and falcon flags outnumbered the lions. Behind them came a modest carriage house decorated in the blue livery of House Arryn. More steeds rounded the corner and Ned beheld his friend and foster brother. Robert was bigger, that was of note considering at Pike he'd already outgrown his armor from the trident. Now the protector of the realm struggled to dismount from his horse, puffing and huffing once his feet met the ground. Ned also saw the broad and tall figure of Stannis Baratheon. Unlike his brother, Stannis showed very little expression and was armored, not clothed in silk. 4 of the King's Guard followed in their wake, led by the Kingslayer and Sir Barristan. The rest had remained in King's Landing with the Queen and her younger children. In between the servants making to and fro, Ned spotted Tyrion Lannister as well. Ned rose from his knees and laughed at Robert's jokes, pleased that good humor had not fled with the man's muscles. Prince Joffrey walked over and made his own introductions. A polite enough boy, took after his mother. He saw the prince shirk back after lingering by Sansa. He must have caught sight of Small Jon behind her. Out of the carriage stepped Jon Arryn, in the flesh. Ned couldn't stop himself from walking forward. Lord Hand. John. Ned said. Eddard, look at you. Going grey. John joked. Soon enough, I'm sure, Ned replied. Lady Lysa and the young Robert Arryn also emerged. Ned frowned when the heir of the Vale stuck tight to his mother, shaking slightly when Ned kneeled to introduce himself. Lysa herself gave the barest of pleasantries, she barely even looked at Cat. Lady Arryn's attention was on someone else. Ned glimpsed another figure in the crowd. His cloak had many small birds across it and he bore a small pointed beard. That would be the Master of Coin, Baelish. The journey was comfortable. Ned asked his foster father. Rough in some places, traveling by ship would have been more comfortable, Jon Arryn told him, though it was pleasant to see the countryside. Getting out of the Red Keep is always a relief. It is good to see you, Ned. Please let me meet your children. Quickly stable hands were making room in the courtyard for the last of their arrivals. Men in the distinctive chainmail of the Riverlands bearing banners of House Tully. Sir Brynden Tully himself rode in and dismounted with ease. The Blackfish waited for the last wheelhouse to come to a stop. A maester and numerous attendants brought forth a litter and with great care Hoster Tully, Lord Paramount of the Riverlands, was placed in it. Ned knew that his good father had taken ill, but rumors did no justice to Lord Tully's state. Swathed in his pillows, his face was thin and his thin hair was bright white. Ned guided the litter back to his family. Cat was in tears at the sight of her once strong father. A light entered Hoster's eyes when he beheld his grandchildren who he eagerly talked with and complimented. Hoster seemed particularly overjoyed to meet Bran and Arya, who reminded him greatly of Catelyn and Edmure as children. Lysa remained distant, having gravitated with her scant few maids to Baelish's side. Robert's patience ran out and he demanded to see the crypts. The next few days were a flurry of activity. Robert insisted on drinking, feasting and hunting in excess. Ned noticed how little Jon Arryn and Stannis attempted to stop this behavior, instead they seemed to focus on matters of the throne. A backlog of letters had arrived in Winterfell, waiting for royal attention. While Robert requested Ned's presence more often than not, there were a few times where they could have a serious conversation. The king had revealed his dissatisfaction with Cersei, made it quite clear with words and actions. He and Robert had taken another walk through the castle, this time Robert wished to see the Godswood. They found Born and Marie brushing the children up on their old tongue. Robert had smiled at Arya and Bran's mischief. "You've got quite the family," Ned Robert remarked. "I kept meaning to ask who those two were." He motioned to Born and Marie, he frowned and leaned close. "They are too old to be yours, are they Brandon's bastards?" Ned grimaced, that was not a rumor he wanted spreading. "Nay, they are my cousins from House Wolftongue." "Never heard of them." "A small house near the Bay of Seals. One of my great-grand-aunts married the heir. My grandfather never liked them. They reached out when I returned from King's Landing." Ned explained. "And they are teaching your children?" Robert asked. "They still receive a normal education, but House Wolftongue is very in tune with northern customs, old customs. Born himself is well-traveled and his father, Torren, has been across the north." Robert seemed confused by it all. Ned wondered if he ever thought of the old customs of the Stormlands, of his Durrandon blood. Perhaps he avoided those ideas because they led to his other blood, the Targaryen lineage of his grandmother and ancestors. They moved on, preparing for a hunt in the Wolf's Wood. That night, once they had a few carcasses to roast, Robert retreated into his cups and Ned sat with Jon Arryn and Stannis. "I hope Winterfell has been welcoming to you, my lords," Ned said. Stannis gave a small nod, while Jon smiled and toasted, in every way possible. "You have quite a home here, Ned." Ned tapped his goblet with Jon. "I wished to thank both of you for your contribution to the canal." Stannis pushed aside his empty plate. "I was most intrigued by your endeavor, Lord Stark. I understand we'll be going to visit the site soon." "I'm glad you think so. It's coming along at a good pace. There were some stumbles at the beginning, I'll not lie. Thankfully, the ground is still soft enough to dig, and once our methods were sorted, work proceeded in earnest," Ned elaborated. "With the stone and mortar from the Vale, we can begin the last phase of the project. In a few weeks, we'll break the dam on the White Knife, open the axe lock, and fill the canal." Jon Arryn hummed to himself, "I must wonder, Ned, a canal is all well and good, but what are you actually going to do with it?" "Sawmills," Ned excitedly told them. "We've already seen there will be enough room on the waterway to put 4, maybe 5, new mills. Lord Tallheart and I have mapped out a rough road to stretch from the canal tip to Torrens Square. Merchants from the west will be able to partage their goods from the port there, up the short road, and onto a river boat bound south for White Harbor." The lords were suitably impressed. Stannis was paying great attention, asking about figures and timetables. "What do you plan to do with the extra income, Lord Stark?" Stannis asked. Ned smirked and quaffed his ale. "Nothing exciting, I'm afraid. Canals and roads, my lord, canals and roads." That earned a loud laugh from Jon Arryn, and the three of them enjoyed an evening of intent conversation. Though after talk threaded into military matters, Ned failed to notice his guests shared a number of grave stares. // // / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / //. A smaller party left Winterfell 2 days later. Ned escorted Robert, Jon Arryn and Stannis into the Wolf's Wood. The laborers' camp was spread out across an old pasture just south of Winterfell. The men were in good spirits at the king's arrival. The lords were suitably impressed by the large trench that now ran west through the ground. The excavated earth was being taken bit by bit down to the neck. Lord Reed was putting the soil to use, shoring up the foundations of Moat Cailin and Greywater Watch. One unforeseen complication had been the issue of faith. Many of the workers and craftsmen, being from the Riverlands and Crown Lands, were concerned about lacking a September to pray in. The Mandaealis had few enough septons and septars on hand, that he couldn't ask them to spare one. Ned had called upon Chael, the former septon of Winterfell. Chael had given up his vows and was now married to Lion, a tanner from Wintertown, with 2 children of his own. Regardless, Chael had agreed to make regular visits to the camp, and Cat had permitted the altars in their September to be moved to a temporary church nearby. Loads of stone and mortar had been brought up from the White Knife, and Ned felt a surge of pride when the first slab was carefully set into the canal wall, and Robert led a great cheer. Sir Barristan was even impressed, a rare expression from a knight who had served kings his whole life. Before they were set to return back, Ned called the lords together, away from the ears of their escort. "What's this about, Ned?" Robert grumbled. Ned laid his hand on the king's shoulder. "I'm sorry to say I had another reason for bringing you away from the castle. There's something I must show you, at Torrens Square." Stannis gripped his belt and frowned. What could possibly warrant such secrecy? "Did any word reach you about brigands on the stony shore?" Ned asked. Robert appeared clueless, but Jon Arryn broke his silence. "Some rumors reached us in the Riverlands. Lord Brynden mentioned merchants seeing smoke along the coast. One of the lords we dined with, House Condon I think, told us you had ridden out with Lord Ryswell and put the bandits to the sword," Stannis added. Robert guffawed and slapped Ned hard on the back. "Good on you, Ned. It's true. Unfortunately, these were no armed beggars," Ned revealed. "They were Ironborn." That silenced Robert's laughter. All the lords were now deadly serious. "You have proof?" Jon Arryn pressed. "In Torrens Square," Ned replied. Robert turned on the spot and called for his horse. "Then let's get a move on." They rode hard farther west. A message was sent back to Winterfell to inform them of their detour. House Tallheart was ready with quarters and food. Ned could see Robert's rage growing as the hours passed. Promptly, they were guided to a closed warehouse by the docks. With guards keeping the perimeter clear, Tallheart men pulled the warehouse doors open, revealing the single surviving Ironborn ship from the raid. Robert swore and marched forward. Stannis' eyes crawled over the hull and Jon Arryn was cradling his head. "Fucking Crickens. I should have gutted Balon in his throne room and sent his lords to the gallows," Robert raged. Jon Arryn walked up to Stannis. "What say you, Master of Ships?" Stannis laid a hand along the hull, knocked his palm on one of the planks, pulled out a small knife and scraped at a visible metal fixture. His skull, somehow, deepened. "It is Ironborn." "I have little doubt," Stannis announced. Ned broke in. "We took over 24 prisoners in the battle. Lord Tallheart has them under guard for you to question." Robert spat. "I don't need some squid like his whimpers. Say the word, Ned. I'll bring my warhammer, you bring ice, and we'll scour those god's-forsaken islands." Ned mostly ignored the king. His moods came quickly and rashly. He kept his attention on Jon Arryn and Stannis. If Robert's visit demonstrated anything, it was that delicate governance of the realm was firmly out of his dear friend's hands. "The royal fleet isn't mustered, that will take time, and I doubt Lord Redwyne will be keen on sending men and ships to another war," Stannis said. Jon Arryn shook his head. "Perhaps a royal emissary should be sent. Balon can be managed with a suitable threat." They were taking lumber, my lords, Ned informed them. "According to some of the prisoners, there have been similar ships sent to isolated parts of the Reach. I'm unsure why these men were ordered to take and burn." Robert's wrath grew to new heights. His face was flushed and his stomach shook with each heavy breath. "The cunt's rebuilding his worthless fleet. Where's the Greyjoy heir? Theon, was it? Maybe his head will put the Squid Lord back in his place." Ned knew the option would be presented. Theon had been under his roof for almost a decade. He'd never allowed himself to open up the boy. Even when Robb had convinced him to tailor Theon's education to more serious ends. In the back of his mind, Ned had always acknowledged that one day he might put Theon's neck across the block. By all laws and treaties, Theon's fate was now sealed, regardless of Balon's complicity with the raiding. "Theon Greyjoy is being hosted in White Harbor. The boy is learning the ways of the sea," Ned said. "We left Payne back in King's Landing, Someone else will need to step in as executioner, Stannis commented. Ned felt compelled to pounce on the opportunity before him. Theon might be more valuable to us alive, especially now. 3 of the most powerful men in the 7 kingdoms turned to him. Ned projected calm in his tone, reminding himself that he was counted among their number. If Balon Greyjoy has been breaking the peace for years, then it's obvious neither he nor his lords care for Theon's life. Balon has 2 brothers who could be named heir instead. We know so little about the Iron Islands, perhaps Balon himself has remarried or fathered a bastard. If he was truly desperate, his daughter's husband could take the name Greyjoy. His life is now forfeit to the crown, but his son may yet be raised into an ally, Ned said. Stannis was disgusted with the idea. Jon Arryn adopted a thoughtful expression. Robert's rage was ebbing away, a look of grief overtaking it. I'm sorry, Ned. Your people have suffered for this disobedience, Robert said. The king spread his hands, and Ned's hopes proved true. I have failed you, my friend. How can the crown repay this affront? The day that Robert arrived, Ned had been forced to fend off his betrothal offers. Sansa's engagement was too far gone to be cancelled, and the North would not idly accept another southern lady for Winterfell, no matter how well they liked Catelyn. With marriages off the table, some other gesture needed to be put forward. Perhaps, Ned paused, making sure to appear deep in thought. If there is war with the Ironborn, the North will need more supplies, more food. The Salt Spear and the Rill River have no defenses, and much farmland lay beside them. Some lords have come to me, and my father before, about the lands in the new gift that lay fallow, untouched by the Night's Watch. It was the perfect bait for Robert. Ned smothered the guilty spark in his heart, and ignored the looks from Jon Arryn. The king slapped his knee, a fitting prize. Fucking Targaryens offered the land without asking anyways, typical. Let it be known my dynasty doesn't take from its friends. Your Grace, the Night's Watch was granted those lands by royal decree, Jon Arryn said. Robert threw his hands up. If the Watch are doing fuck all with it, then why not return it? I'd rather honest and loyal lords were fed than see it go to waste. Jon Arryn must have seen something in Robert's posture, or perhaps in his tone, that Ned did not recognize. The hand of the king blinked a few times before his shoulders slumped. Robert smiled at the lack of resistance. Ned wondered if Jon reserved his energy for arguments of greater import. And who shall rule this new territory? Jon asked. Will it be divided among the nearby houses? Fuck that, Robert interjected. Ned and his blood deserve a reward for all their service. Ned bowed. Our blood was given willingly, I only think of my people. Jon Arryn spoke again. Land that harsh, and so far north will not be easily reclaimed. Especially with the wildlings close by. As I understand it, Lord Stark, you have 2 younger sons. Could one of them be given the new gift? Stannis asked. Ned shook his head. Their futures are unclear. I know Lord Hoster has spoken of granting Bran a holdfast in the Riverlands. Jon Arryn nodded, a wise suggestion. Rickon is practically still in the cradle. Truthfully, I had hoped for my youngest to inherit a rebuilt Moat Cailin. For too long has the fortress laid in disrepair, Ned informed them. Bah! Politics. Robert dismissed. His eyes seemed clear, but he'd had his own fair share of wine with his luncheon. Ha! Robert smiled, wide and excited, almost like a young boy. Your bastard, Ned. Why not raise him up? He looks a strong lad, he's got your look to him. If he's got those wolf-lip cousins nearby, then all the better. Your Grace, you can't go legitimizing bastards as you please, Stannis objected. Robert scowled. I wouldn't insult Cat like that. The boy can start his own branch. Give him some new name, Snowstick maybe, ha ha. Ned stood there baffled. This was far beyond any guesses or anticipated responses. He'd expected the land would be granted back to his house, and from there he could begin that long process of determining its new structure. If Hoster was serious about a place for Bran in the Riverlands, it would cement ties with North for generations to come. Likewise, Moat Cailin was a keystone to the North. Trade, armies and news, all made their way through the neck, and Rickon would become House Stark's representative among the coastal families. With Sansa as the Lady of Last Hearth and Arya Stark as Lady of Winterfell, the northern region was firmly behind them. There was little need for anyone closer to the wall. His first instinct was to reject the idea, but then the thought of John being so close to the wildlings, and the mountain clans gave him pause. His hesitation cost him. Robert stomped out of the warehouse, apparently fed up with the business of ruling for the day. It's decided then. I'll not have your namesake be some pitiful sworn sword, John. Make sure the papers are in place by the end of our visit. We'll announce it before we depart. Ned. Let's find ourselves some of that honey mead the imp was gloating about. We need to celebrate your son's new title. The Lord of Winterfell, Hand of the King, and Master of Ships were left standing in the dark, all vaguely shocked and frustrated. Ned sighed and began to follow when John's voice stopped him. Ned, let Robert find his own entertainment, we'll join him shortly. Their trio walked deeper into the warehouse, to the aft of the ship, well away from the doors and any eavesdroppers. There is a most pressing matter we must speak to you about, Lord Stark. The reason why I joined my brother's journey north, Stannis whispered. A great matter, John added. In the fading light of the day, Ned was told in detail of treachery of the highest order. The Queen cuckolding the King was shocking enough. The fact that she had passed off her incestuous children as true-born was nearly too insane to believe. The two lords' evidence was strong, more than just the likeness of the children. They had witnesses to strange behavior, centuries of lineage records, a timeline of Tommen's birth that coincided with Robert's movements during the Greyjoy Rebellion, but also the Kingslayer's late departure from the Red Keep to join the royal forces. It was terribly plausible, and that fact alone was a threat to Robert's reign. At the moment, House Baratheon was smaller than House Stark by a ridiculous margin. 3 grown men and 1 young girl. What's to be done? Ned wondered. I will depart the north by ship from White Harbor, Stannis explained. Men and ships are being gathered at Dragonstone. From there, I'll join Lord Arryn in King's Landing with enough troops to seize the city from the Red Cloaks and the City Watch. The City Watch? Yes, Ned. Janos Slynt, their commander, is on someone's payroll, but we know not who. He has the favor of the Queen, which makes him difficult to replace. We cannot be certain Lannister gold will not bring him to their side, John said. Ned resisted the urge to pull at his hair. Lord Tywin will not accept this easily. That is why we need your support, Ned, John told him. If the old lion decides to fight, we need the North and the Riverlands to put him back in his place. You have it, my lords, be assured and hold no doubts, you have my support, Ned declared. I must stress, the children cannot be harmed. Tywin will not, cannot, bow to terms if his grandchildren are slain. What of the Queen and the Kingslayer? Stannis said, would you have them spared as well? Sir Jaime can be sent to the Watch, his sister to the Septs. What is most important is their confessions. These accusations are words on wind to any who would seek Lannister favor. We need their confessions to legally prove the affair. Even if none truly believe it, they will have less cause to reject the accusations entirely, Ned suggested. Stannis gave a begrudging nod. John was grinning proudly. Wise counsel, Ned, John complimented. Their impromptu council ended. His fellow conspirators, for that was what they were, followed Robert back to Sentinel Hall. They made quick arrangements for the Ironborn prisoners to be sent to Dragonstone. Robert was halfway through a mug with a blushing maid in his lap. Ned resolved himself to another tiring night. Hoster would need to be informed. The Riverlands couldn't be drawn into war with the Westerlands at a moment's notice. His good father must be prepared. Ned would visit a Godswood and pray that Stannis and Jon's plans were successful. He had seen enough men die over that damn throne. // Chapter 30, The Thieving Bird. Notes. /n, there is an instance of child injury, not graphic or even descriptive but content warning all the same. The paragraph is near the end of the chapter and starts with any pride Rob felt vanished. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Rob was going to buy Sansa an entire range of paints from White Harbor. Maybe he'd order some new jewelry, even commission a new harp. He was certain that without his gracious sister, Rob would have torn out his tully red hair and taken Grey Wind into the woods for an extended hunting trip. The moment father left with the king and Lords Arryn and Baratheon, the responsibility for managing the castle fell onto the rest of the family's shoulders. In the absence of the three major figureheads, it meant that each faction of attendants needed to be corralled. Rob had taken charge of the men-at-arms, horses and the barracks, while Sansa and Catelyn organized the various maids and ladies-in-waiting. Sansa was the one who assigned Arya and Bran to dog duty, keeping the direwolves under control. Jon, Born and Marie committed to entertaining the northern nobles. With his newly adorned shepherd's mantle, Jon's status had become even more muddled and made most of the Northerns in Winterfell unsure of how to deal with him. Regardless, the entire Stark family united in this joint effort. Meeting his grandfather had been interesting. Despite grandfather Hoster's ill health, he still insisted on eating and meeting with all of Catelyn's children. Their grandfather asked many questions. Rob felt like he was being tested by Maester Lewin. He asked Rob about the local lords, about where the best trade routes were, where Winterfell got its stocks of food, where its steel came from. The old lord appeared satisfied with his answers, and downright joyous when Bran could espouse all the necessary parts of being a knight. With Sansa and Arya he'd been quite penal, even condescending. It was obvious he disliked Arya's manner of dress but complimented her courtesies and wit. Rob thought that if he'd met Arya a few years ago he'd have fainted. Grandfather's underestimation of Sansa ended when she brought out her latest artwork, the beginnings of a truly massive tapestry depicting the history of the North after Torrhen Stark bent the knee. It was ambitious and would likely take months if not a full year to meet Sansa's satisfaction. Catelyn also relied on Sansa for her usual household duties which didn't go unnoticed. If not for Smalljon's constant presence, grandfather would have likely been throwing out names of potential suitors. That was another new revelation. Smalljon was only a year or so older than Rob, 7 and 10 to Sansa's newly 5 and 10, she'd celebrated her name a day before going to Last Hearth. Rob was unsure if either of them had truly considered any kind of romance, with his sister still young, but Sansa had charmed the whole Umber family regardless. Smalljon and his small escort of guards and cousins ensured the Stark children had adequate escorts among the strangers filling Winterfell. Great Uncle Brynden he insisted on being called, avoided grandfather at nearly every opportunity outside of shared meals. The famed Blackfish spent most days in the yard alongside Sir Roderick. He spared with Rob but spent most of the time with Bran. The young squire was attached to Uncle Brynden at the hip and barely paid attention to anyone else. Arya likewise followed Daisy Mormont around like a lost pup. Aunt Lysa was odd. Rob hated to admit it, but he disliked her immensely. She was rude and standoffish, repeatedly spurning his mother and anyone besides cousin Robin, her maids, and oddly enough Lord Baelish. From rumors, Jory was able to learn Baelish was not originally meant to accompany the royal party. Only a fervent, nearly hysterical fit from Lady Arryn convinced the king to bring the Lord from the Fingers along. Lord Baelish himself had acquiesced and appeared to be a close friend of his aunt, though Rob and Jon had both caught the man staring improperly at Lady Stark. Sansa shared with them that a number of servants had reported Baelish making strange overtures to the staff, creeping around odd places in the castle and lingering outside the crypts. He resolved to have the servants questioned after the king departed. That behavior sounded far too much like the machinations of a master of whisperers, not a master of coin. The message of his father's detour down to Torrhen's Square just exacerbated the castle's chaos. In desperate need of a reprieve, Rob resorted to offering Uncle Brynden a tour of Winterfell. Tyrion Lannister and Sir Jaime Lannister were both present when Rob made his invitation and decided to tag along. The imp was sarcastic and, according to the steward, far too fond of wine and women. Sir Jaime was overly smug, but being forced to guard Prince Joffrey was a cruel enough task. Winterfell lacked extensive gold adornment, but Rob asserted no one could walk the massive walls, see the intricate woodwork, stand inside the glass gardens, and still remain apathetic to its grandeur. The tour was pleasant. Lord Tyrion had an appreciation for the history of the ancient castle, and both Sir Jaime and Uncle Brynden admired the dense fortifications. Rob guided them from the outer hall back towards the first keep. Sir Jaime was sniping with Uncle Brynden about stories from the Ninepenny War, when Grey Wind stopped ahead of them. The wolf paused mid-step, then turned towards the broken tower. Rob almost ignored the motion. Grey Wind might have caught sight of a squirrel. His heart quickened between one breath and the next. He smelled no bird or squirrel, instead he heard two voices softly floating on the wind. Rob stopped at Grey Wind's side and followed his gaze. The broken tower was in better repair after his parents discovered Arya's little hideaway. The stonework was still patchy, but the floors had been repaired and the roof reinforced. Most importantly, they added a lock to the door. A lock that Rob saw was unlatched. The only keys to the tower were supposed to be with Father, Steward Poole and the head of the guard. Father was obviously gone. Steward Poole was overseeing some matter in Wintertown, and Rob had ordered Doric, the head of the guard, to remain near his mother and sister. The broken tower should have been empty. Rob. Uncle Brynden said. Rob raised a finger to quiet him, then stalked forward with Grey Wind in tow. Carefully, he slipped through the tower door, glad that the hinges had been oiled recently. Brynden and the Lannisters had followed him. All were tactful enough to remain silent. Inside the tower, the sounds were more apparent. A pair of voices filtered from the upper floors. Rob caught his uncle's eyes and shook his head, then pointed up. Taking great care, Rob and Grey Wind led the way upstairs. At every step, Rob concentrated to ensure the intruders were not alerted to their arrival. They made it to the second floor undetected. The third floor chamber was only a few steps above them. The voices were clear now. Rob flushed when he realized the sounds were of a couple in the middle of a passionate embrace. He expected some hint of laughter from Uncle Brynden, who hadn't kept his crass sense of humor secret. Instead, the Blackfish's face was stone. Rob was concerned until the moment he registered the woman's voice. "Yes, Petter, yes." In an instant, Uncle Brynden pushed forward and ran up the stairs. Rob and Sir Jaime rushed after him, bumping into each other in their haste to follow, leaving Tyrion and Grey Wind behind. Up the stairs and through the doorway, Rob only had a second to register what he saw. Aunt Lysa was screaming. She had grabbed a sheet to cover herself. A few candles, furs and a bottle of wine sat beside the cot she laid in. Clothes were strewn about the floor. Uncle Brynden was bent over the nude form of Petter Baelish and had already blooded his fists. Together, Jaime and Rob pulled the Blackfish off the skinny man. Uncle Brynden was shouting. Spittle dribbled down his chin as his veins throbbed in his neck. Baelish was curled on the ground. A stream of blood and snot spilled from his lips and nose. Grey Wind's barks outshone both Aunt Lysa and the Blackfish, which drew people to the tower. By the time Rob had managed to calm his uncle, Jory Castle had arrived with Stark and Tully armsmen. Uncle Bryden ordered a pair of breeches be forced onto Baelish and then had him dragged outside. Rob set his foot down at common men seeing his aunt in such a state. Grey Wind quickly sent them running back down the stairway. He took care to help his aunt dress, coaxing her out of the tower afterwards. Lysa had devolved into angry and devastated sobs. Sobs that intensified when they stepped out of the tower and saw Baelish staggering in the rough grip of Tully guards. She made an attempt to run to him, but Rob held her steady and ordered Jory to keep her calm. Finally, with some moments of peace, Rob turned to his uncle. "We'll need to wait for the king to return, and Lord Arryn, Rob said. Brynden wiped spots of blood from his cheeks and spit. "He'll rot in a cell until then." "Uncle!" Aunt Lysa shouted. "I don't want to hear it, Lysa. Hoster will deal with you." Brynden roared back. Rob turned to the Lannister brothers. "Lord Tyrion, Sir Jaime, I hope you'll be willing to testify to what we just saw." Tyrion raised a single blonde eyebrow. "Most certainly, Lord Rob. Things of this nature can be devastating if not handled properly." Sir Jaime hid a smile, but Rob saw the laughter in his eyes. No doubt the Kingslayer was already crafting some jape about trout jumping from the falcon to the mockingbird. All of them began the trek back to the keep. They entered the main courtyard, which was full of people who had finished breaking their fast. A group of Vale guards stood around Robert Arryn, who was excitedly sitting atop a destrier near the horse stalls. Next to the keep doors, Prince Joffrey was complaining about something to the Hound, while Westerman milled around. Rob only belatedly realized the trouble they'd stumbled into. Robin Arryn took one look at his mother's disheveled form, her devastated face, and screamed. "Mother!" Robin yelled. Everyone turned and took in the new arrivals. Confusion ran across their faces, but the Valyman had little time to process it. They were being ordered about by the heir to their lord. The Lannister brothers jogged to join their nephew. Brynden walked forward with Rob, who hoped that his uncle's reputation would deter any rash moves. "Nephew," Brynden began, "something's happened with your mother. You should go to your Aunt Cat." Robin wasn't listening, he was trembling and flushing an ugly shade of red. "I want mother." Robin whipped a finger at the Vale guards. "Go get my mother. Get her now." One of the Valiman looked worried his lord's was going to fall off his horse and laid a hand to steady the boy. "Lord Robin, your uncle is the Knight of the Gate, you should heed him," the Valiman said. Rob thought his name was Quinn, one of Lord Arryn's trusted men. Little Robin actually began to beat at the man's hand, screaming, "I want mother. I want mother." Not all the Valiman were so confident in Bryndon's reputation as Quinn. Rob guessed they might fear Lord Arryn's wrath if they stood by and did nothing. A group of them strode forward towards Jory. Rob's men stepped up to intercede. Rob turned back to his cousin, intent on defusing the situation, when a pompous blonde princeling decided to intrude. "I'll not have some savages assaulting my father's small council. Lord Baelish is a servant of the crown. Hound, go release him," Prince Joffrey commanded. Rob whipped around to see the Hound and his burnt face marching with red cloaks at his back. "Prince Joffrey, the Master of Coin was found in an indecent position with my aunt, Lady Arryn. He must be held accountable to your father," Rob insisted. "You cannot release him. I can do whatever I want. I say Baelish is a friend of the crown. I want him released, and whoever laid their hands upon him will lose them." Joffrey shouted, a cruel snarl cutting across his cheeks. The Tully men were visibly displeased with the threat made to the Blackfish and stepped forward to support the Winterfell men. Rob desperately thought of some way to calm everyone down, but his thoughts came too slowly. The Hound, without a pause, pulled his fist back and punched the first man that stood between him and Baelish. A Valiman shoved a Northman, elbows were thrown, and in the blink of an eye, the entire courtyard had devolved into a brawl. Rob rushed with Uncle Bryndon, and managed to force their way back to Aunt Lysa, stopping her from trying to reach Baelish, who was now caught in the fierce fist fights between the Lannisters and Tullys. Rob saw Baelish shake loose his captor's grips and stumble away. A sharp whistle cleared the melee, and Rob felt, more than saw, Grey Wind, Ghost and Crag bound out of the Godswood to encircle the fleeing lord. More of the wolves streamed out into the yard. More, Birena and Shaggy jumped up the keep steps, sending Prince Joffrey and his uncles running inside, while Summer and Lady burst out from the direction of the glass gardens. Behind them came Catelyn, Sansa and a large number of Baratheon and Stark guards led by Sir Roderick. With numbers now on his side, Rob let his focus drift. In a strange way, he knew that Sansa's heart began to mirror his. Together they reached deep into their lungs, and the castle rang with the monstrous call of nearly 10 direwolves, shocking the men out of their scuffle. Any pride Rob felt vanished when he watched a pair of red cloaks throw themselves away from the wolves and run straight into Robin's horse. The steed kicked hard, already stressed by the brawl, and bucked. Robin was violently thrown forward, flying straight to the ground with a traumatic crack. Pandemonium erupted, far outstripping any fighting. Lady Catelyn screamed and rushed forward with Sansa. Sir Roderick ordered the Baratheon and Stark men to force everyone back to their barracks under watch. Rob brusquely sent someone to fetch Maester Lewin. He rushed to his mother's side. She was desperately trying to wake her nephew up, but there was no response. Cousin Robin seemed even smaller, lying there in the dirt. Maester Lewin arrived and began to examine the injured boy. Lewin frowned, squinting as he felt along Robin's head and then down to his neck. Rob felt faint, as if in a fog. Servants brought out the litter his grandfather had been using. Carefully, Robin was transferred into it and whisked away into the castle. "Rob, what happened?" Sansa asked after their mother had followed the Maester. "We found Aunt Lysa and Lord Baelish together," Rob explained. He put enough emphasis on together to convey his meaning. Sansa was shocked at the sheer insult of committing adultery inside Winterfell, the seat of House Stark. Ignoring that, Aunt Lysa was Lady Arryn, the wife of the Hand of the King. Was Baelish a madman? Cuckolding a man with the kingdom at his beck and call, the foster father of the Demon of the Trident and the Quiet Wolf. He was a lord of the Vale, Jon Arryn was his liege lord, there was no one he could turn to for protection. "We need to separate them," Sansa declared. She and Rob worked together to have Lysa secluded in the family wing of the First Keep. Baelish was taken to Winterfell's Gull, a small dungeon dug out near one of the guard posts. Their quick response did little to hide the commotion. Rumors were already flying by the time Rob managed to find Jon, Bran and Arya at the archery range. With their mother preoccupied, Rob and Sansa were forced to break the news to Grandfather Hoster. Strangely, Grandfather took the revelation quite well, focusing on Robin's health above all else. Rob and Sansa left him and Uncle Brynden alone. The Tully shouting match began before the young Starks had even left the hallway. Rob decided a messenger had to be sent to find the king. Father needed to return and Lord Arryn needed to be informed. What their reaction would be, he could not say. It had all gone awry so quickly, this whole event needed to be sorted out and would no doubt sour the entire royal visit. That was a matter for the lords, Rob reckoned. All he could was keep the peace and pray that Robin awoke in good health. Notes. /n, well there we have it. Unfortunately, some things change and others stay the same. With Baelish around, many of you knew that something was going to happen. Chapter 31, The Prowling Wolf. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The return to Winterfell was less joyous than their departure. The implications of the Ironborn weighed heavily on Lords Arryn and Baratheon. Ned was burdened by the great matters reveal, more so when he began connecting the half-tales from a drunken Robert on Joffrey's strange behaviors. Westeros knew what that kind of instability could create when mixed with a crown. Though his companions were unaware, the North too knew the dangers of an unstable monarch. Certain Stark histories featured the ramblings and scribblings of such kings and lords. Their passages did not last long, as often they would be put to the side, effectively deposed from power if not in name. If they refused, blood was shed, and those were some of the darkest periods in northern history. The reign of the Mason Red Stark was a lesson not soon forgotten. More than one unliked or unfit king or queen passed their years in a small holdfast or took the black, while sons and daughters took rule of the kingdom in hand. King Theon Stark in his old age had been summarily defanged by Queen Mother Lewa, when the hungry wolf became obsessed with mounting a campaign into the Riverlands. Banishing his dark thoughts, Ned prepared for the road. Their small group departed from Castle Sewin, the last stop of the trip, when he caught sight of a rider, bearing a Stark banner on one of the Winterfell's fastest steeds. "Lord Stark! Lord Stark!" the rider called out. One of the younger men-at-arms under Jory's command rode forward. His face was covered in sweat and his horse trembled. "I'm lucky to have found you so quickly. Lord Rob has urgent need of you." "You rode all the way from Winterfell?" Robert asked. The messenger gasped for air. "Yes, Your Grace. I rode hard from the castle yesterday for Torrens Square. I stopped to sleep at Canal Camp where I was told you'd already returned. It was late, but I could not tarry." "What's this message?" Lord Arryn asked. "Ill tidings. Lord Baelish has been arrested by Lord Rob and Lord Brynden, with both the Lannisters as witness," the messenger explained. "My master of coin," Robert clarified. "What crime could they have discovered that warranted arrest?" Stannis wondered. The messenger paled, looking from Lord Arryn to Ned. Ned gave an encouraging nod. "Lord Baelish was discovered engaged, indecently with Lady Arryn, he revealed." Ned thrust out his hand on instinct to hold Jon's shoulder. The older lord listed for a moment before righting himself. "What in the seven hells are you saying, man?" Robert shouted. The messenger quailed before the king's wrath. "Lord Rob and the Blackfish caught the two together in the broken tower." "How did they get into the tower?" Ned interrupted. Steward Poole was called back and discovered the master of coin had stolen keys from various servants. The messenger's eyes swung back to Jon Arryn. When Lord Rob was bringing them back to the keep, a brawl broke out between the guards. "I'm sorry, Lord Arryn." In the confusion, Lord Robert was thrown from his horse. Ned felt Jon's dead weight slide forward. "Robert," he barked. The king kicked forward and pulled their foster father upright. "Jon! Jon!" the two men implored. Despite infirmity rearing its head, Jon Arryn rallied. "Is he alive?" Jon demanded. "Yes. Under the Maester's care." Without delay, Jon Arryn kicked and sped off, with the royal party desperate to match his sudden speed. Ned gave word that the messenger was to be given rest in Castle Sewin before following. They rode hard back to Winterfell. Such a fervor and urgency Ned had not seen in Jon Arryn since the desperate days of the rebellion. The gate was opened and the lords leaped from their saddles and rushed towards the keep. Rob and Catelyn stood there to meet them. I want an explanation of what happened, Robert insisted. Get me the Kingslayer and the Blackfish, the imp too. Ned left the king behind in the central hall. Rob and Cat led them back to Maester Lewin's rooms, which joined a study to the infirmary. Rob's rushed explanation included Prince Joffrey and the Hound's involvement. Baelish had been silent since his imprisonment, and Cat had kept Brynden and Hoster away for fear of an untimely death. Apparently Lysa was despondent and unresponsive, barely eating or drinking. When Ned quietly asked about Steward Poole's findings on the stolen keys, Rob revealed it was Arya and Bran who had been following Baelish using the eyes of birds and cats. The two children had witnessed him pickpocketing the keys from the headguard and sneaking into the pantry the night before. The two lost track of the snake the morning of the incident and failed to find Rob in time. Maester Lewin brought them to the cot that held young Robert, or Robin as his family had taken to calling him. Arya felt it was too confusing to have 3 Roberts in the castle all at once. Jon Arryn staggered to the bedside and carefully laid his wrinkled palms on the boy's still face. "My son," he whispered with teary eyes, "please, not you too." Ned gently grasped Jon's shoulder. The energy that had driven him to ride like a man 50 years younger seeped out with every second. The hand of the king shrank away, and the stalwart paragon of Ned's youth was replaced by an aged man with too many burdens. "Lewin, speak plainly," Ned ordered. Winterfell's maester clasped his hands together. "My lords, young Arryn breathes, but his neck is broken. I do not know if he will ever wake." A choked sob escaped Jon's throat before he had a great gasp and collapsed. Ned feared the shock had been too great and Jon's heart had given out. Rob helped him place Jon Arryn into a cot beside his sleeping son. Lewin assured him it was simply a combination of the hard ride and stress. The Starks left Lord Arryn to whatever peace his sleep could provide. Cat wrapped her arms around her husband and warmed his worried soul. Rob offered to go inform the king and track down the rest of the children. They would all dine together in the family wing tonight. An evening with simple but delicious fare helped to warm the mood of the Starks. Bourne and Marie had been welcomed at their table, but Ned had to convince Catelyn to allow Val as well, lest Jon take his meal with her and the servants. Arya and Sansa were both entranced by the free folk woman. Val was conscious enough to keep her true origins a mystery, but with Bourne's own travels beyond the wall, she twisted a few tales to still speak the truth. She had seen the wall, hunted in the haunted forest, and fought raiders alongside her brothers and sisters. The few pieces of jewelry she'd brought to Winterfell caught Sansa's eyes in particular. They were rough but spoke of intense labor with little materials. Craftsmanship shone through even the low-quality metal. Catelyn took more of a shine to Marie. The two engaged each other on many topics, and Marie was very interested in his wife's tales of the Riverlands. Marie regaled her own recent journey south and her affection for the streams and hills. Bourne took the burden of entertaining Bran and Rickon, allowing Ned, Rob and Jon time to quietly converse. Ned and Catelyn had already spoken about Lysa's likely fate. To avoid offending the Tullys and Starks, she'd be sent to a coven of silent sisters, likely somewhere in the Reach. Baelish would be stripped of his positions, and Robert would probably give him the choice of the block or the wall. Such flagrant betrayal of both his liege lord and the king was not easily dismissed, not to mention the dispersion the whole incident would throw on Robert Arryn's legitimacy. If Baelish was a more important lord, he might have gotten away with being exiled. His grace was not in a forgiving mood. No one could say for how long their affair had run. Catelyn feared it originated when Littlefinger was just a ward in Riverrun. She vaguely recalled some bitter argument between Lysa and Hoster after young Petter was sent away from Riverrun. Cat had assumed her sister simply missed her friend. After all, it was the younger Tully who had nursed Petter's wounds from his duel with Ned's brother, Brandon. Looking back on Lysa's sudden illness afterward, darker suspicions festered. Catelyn planned on confronting both her father and uncle on the matter. The two men had been cloistered the whole day and night following the arrest, only seeking her out once Lord Arryn had returned. They begged a delay of such talk until the matter could be officially handled by the crown. The Lady of Winterfell was laden with duties, so she acquiesced. The next sunrise brought little comfort. Ned and the Baratheons had gathered in Maester Lewin's study, which Ned had loaned to Stannis. Jon Arryn was awake, but senseless and had little energy for his official duties. Maester Lewin advised him to refrain from any serious tasks for weeks, if not months. "Maester, he is the hand of the king," Stannis said. He can't be my hand if he's bedridden, Robert complained. Lewin insisted that Lord Arryn's body was at its limits. The king stroked his large chins, then turned to Ned with an idea in his eyes. Ned spoke first. No, Robert, no. Why not? You know your business, and without Jon I need allies by my side. Robert's passion was insering as always, even hidden by layers of sloth. Ned could feel Stannis' molar disintegrating with every word. Stannis knows King's Landing and has been serving you side by side with Jon for many years, Ned reminded. Robert glanced at his brother. They scowled in unison. The master of ships has other duties, the king excused. Robert! Ned exclaimed, I cannot leave the north for years on end. Robb is not ready, and with the return of the new gift, I have duties here. Bah! Robert threw his hands up. Ned guessed his friend considered rescinding his own royal decree. When it came to changing Robert's mind, Ned knew you had to back him into a corner, then open a way out. With Jon and his heir indisposed, the Vale will need reassurance, Ned said. You've never gotten on well with Lord Royce or Lord Redfort. Ned feared he may regret his next words, but Robert, and importantly Stannis, would need support to keep the Lannisters and now the Vale in line. Hoster and Brynden had explained in detail just how essential Jon Arryn was to the crown's stability. I will come south, Ned declared. Not as your hand, but as your advisor until Jon has recovered. Ned's admission brightened Robert's mood. It would not do to remind Robert that Jon was unlikely to ever be fit for the position again. Lewin had warned that with such a sudden lapse of health, Jon's strength was unlikely to fully rebuild. At best, he would recover and return to the Eyrie to set the Vale to rights. It's decided then. Here, Stannis, perhaps the pin will bring a smile to your rocky face. Robert laughed as he tossed the metal pin onto his brother's desk. He then left to watch the spars in the yard, leaving Stannis and Ned to plan the exact details of their departure. I will accompany Lord Arryn and his son to White Harbor. From there we can sail to King's Landing with speed, Stannis explained. My wife will want me to escort her father and uncle through the neck. It will give me the opportunity to rally my men. Stannis looked up from his stack of letters, then glanced to the open doorway. Ned gave a sharp whistle and more rose from his place on the carpets and moved to sit outside the doorway, which Ned closed behind him. To think he would worry about spies and loose-tongued servants in his own home. How many can you bring? Stannis asked. Ned ran the numbers through his head. The battle on the stones, as the bards coined it, had brought him goodwill with his lords, and many were envious that the Ryswells and Glovers rode with him. Any house asked to send men to King's Landing would take it as a massive sign of trust. It presented an opportunity to reach out to those not receiving a betrothal or fosterings. I can ask for 400, perhaps 500 men from Barrow Hall, Oldcastle, Flint's Finger, and the Dread Fort. Lord Marndaly can spare ships to escort you while we take the road. If your fears about this Commander Slynt hold true, how large is the city watch? Stannis frowned. Little under 1,000, their numbers never recovered from the sack. I stationed 200 men from Dragonstone at the port and 600 from the Stormlands in the city. The Red Cloaks occupy much of the palace, perhaps 250 men all told. Though I fear the Queen has strengthened them during our travels. I plan to resupply at Dragonstone and bring the rest of the royal fleet. That would add another 400 swords. Ned added together their forces, 500 Northmen, 1,200 Baratheon. Good odds, I'd say. Stannis growled, unless Tywin Lannister decides to object. Ned leaned onto Stannis' desk, seeking to reassure the new hand. I'll speak with my good father about the coming trouble. If we're desperate, then the Riverlands can be called upon. With Lord Arryn in his present state, I'm unsure if we can rely on the Vale arriving in strength. Stannis paused, staring into a nearby candle. He seemed to be grappling with his words. I will admit that I do not know the Lords of the Vale as you or Robert do. I have never had much success when dealing with them. Would you be willing to reach out on my behalf? Stannis asked. Of course, Stannis. Ned agreed and began to write the first of nearly a dozen letters. Perhaps while among the king's court, Ned could also find time to speak with House Tyrell about the Ironborn. The next weeks sped by as preparations for a quick departure were made. The king's visit would end up lasting a month and a half. Ships from White Harbor to the Crown Lands were chartered and supply wagons carefully arranged. Replies from the Locks, Flints, Lady Barbary and even Lord Bolton arrived promptly. Arrangements were being made to converge on Moat Cailin. A few final matters had to be managed, including Brindon's offer to Squire Bran. A great honor but quite unexpected. Her uncle had asked for a private dinner with Ned and Caitlin during which he made his case. Uncle Caitlin had said, "You rarely take on squires. How many years has it been since you knighted Lord Mallister?" Bryn shook his head. "I only grew tired of having young whelps tripping over themselves. Aside from that, the bloody gate required more than enough of my attention. I now have the time and hopefully enough life left in me for one more student." Caitlin frowned from beside Ned in their private dining room. "Do you mean you're leaving the bloody gate?" Bryn finished his wine and nodded. "With Lysa's disgrace I feel it would be improper to continue my duties there. I sent word to my friend Sir Morton to take up the post until the Vale Lords can properly order themselves." Ned spoke up then. "Lord Royce and Redfort have called a council to discuss matters. I know Sir Egan means to send a detachment of Arryn men from the Eyrie to meet the Hand's ships in King's Landing. Regardless," Brindon continued, "I've been quite impressed by young Bran these past few weeks. Your son has the air of enthusiasm about him, Cat. The Marndalis are of good skill, but I swear that if you allow Bran to squire at my side, I shall make him a man to be proud of." Ned could already see the eagerness in Cat's eyes. His wife loved her uncle dearly and the man had done much to charm his grandnieces and nephews. The Blackfish's support of Robb during Littlefinger's arrest gained him favor with Ned. Bran's dreams of knighthood would become a near certainty under Brindon's tutelage. Jason Mallister, Lord of Seaguard, was the perfect example of the Blackfish's legendary status. A young lordling grown into a renowned tourney knight, much liked by his people and a warrior of skill. A bright future was opened if Bran followed in his path. "Very well," Ned said, "we would be honored to have our son squire with you." Caitlin's face lit with a blinding smile. "I'm sure Bran will be ecstatic." His wife considered something and threaded her fingers with Ned's. "Will you be returning to Riverrun?" "Hoster desires me to help him take Edmure in hand," Brindon confirmed. "With his health he worries more than a mother hen." "If that is the case, then perhaps more than just Ned can journey south," Caitlin suggested. "I have always wanted to show our children the wonders of House Tully's lands. With Bran accompanying you, why not more of us?" Brindon looked enthused and Caitlin no doubt wished to spend time with their children after so long apart fostering. She had done admirably to welcome the other ladies who came as companions for Sansa, but her heart would always rest with their own family. "Robb would need to remain here as the Stark in Winterfell, but I see no reason to stop Arya and Rickon from accompanying you," Ned said. "What of young Sansa?" Brindon asked. Caitlin grinned. "Since her name-a-day passed at the New Year, we had little chance to celebrate. Her friends Aelys Cart Stark and Omer Umber have decided to gather at Last Hearth to hold a joint feast with several other guests, including many younger lords and ladies. Sansa has been planning it for months and I doubt she would miss the event. Reminds me of another girl who was ever taking the reins of her social circle." Brindon led them in a cheerful laugh. "With most of their house absent, it would fall to their eldest to manage the myriad of challenges and disputes of the North. Thankfully, Jon would remain with Born to support Robb in their absence." Ned had already seen the shifts of reception between Jon and the nobles. The Direwolf and Shepherd attire were strong indicators to most that the bastard of Winterfell had gained a measure of status all his own. The weirwood mask gave no power on its own, it marked Jon as a recognized member of a northern-wide community that most lords and small folk had grown up around. Ned found it somewhat strange that Jon had gained more respect for his time on Skagos than the many years in Winterfell. Speaking of which, Ned had been compelled to bring Robert's decision to his family. They had gathered for one of their last private dinners before the voyage south. Ned stood from his seat, holding a goblet and coughed for the table's attention. "One last matter will be addressed before the king departs," Ned said. "At the farewell feast he will announce to all and the realm that he has granted the lands of the new gift back to the north." His children spoke over each other simultaneously. Their chatter was quieted by a look from Caitlin. "Those lands belong to the Night's Watch," Arya said. "They did," Ned replied, "but they have gone untouched for decades. Their people either died or fled to safer lands." "Does this mean the land will go to House Umber?" Sansa asked. Ned shook his head. "No, the king has decided that a new lord and house shall be raised to rebuild the new gift." Caitlin carefully kept her face neutral. She understood the necessity of following King Robert's decree and was soothed by Ned's plans to give Rickon Moat Cailin and potentially a seat in the Riverlands for Bran. "Well, father, who is it?" Robb asked. Ned took a deep breath. "King Robert Baratheon has decided that Jon Snow will be named Lord of the Gift. He shall found his own house and pass the title to his sons and their sons, for as long as his line endures." He expected the shocked silence from Jon, and indeed his boy was pale. A dribble of water spilled down his lips when he jerked his cup away. Jon had enough time to take a single breath, which caught in his throat, before Arya jumped up from her seat and threw herself into his chest. Bran and Rickon soon followed, and Jon's chair nearly tipped over. Robb and Sansa bodily moved their younger siblings out of the way to grab Jon and haul him up for a massive hug. Ned's children were overjoyed for their brother, and he could admit it lightened his heart to see no spite or jealousy in their faces. Jon finally came back to his senses and pulled away from the embraces. He tentatively turned to Ned. "Father," Jon began, I don't know what to say." Ned stepped forward and took Jon by the shoulders. "All you need to say is an oath to myself and the king tomorrow. Your title will be announced at the end of the week, during the farewell feast. But, where will my seat be? Will I have vassals? The new gift is abandoned, you said so yourself. Where will the people come from? How will I support myself?" Jon rattled off his questions in a rush. "There is time, Jon," Ned replied. "I do not expect you to take up the lordship soon. There will need to be much work, negotiations and surveying. We will need to consult the Umbers and the Mountain clans, and I'm sure there will be tense talks with the Night's Watch. There is time. For now, perhaps your brothers and sisters can help you choose your new name and sigil." Ned took in his son's face, for though he was of Lyanna's body and no doubt had held all her love for that brief time she could give it, Ned was Jon's father, and until his death, not even the old gods could make him think otherwise. "My son," Ned murmured, "I also give you permission to use the Stark name in your own, so that none may forget that your blood comes from mine." Jon's tears finally broke from the dam behind his eyes, and his nearly grown son buried his face in Ned's shoulder. Even Caitlin was moved by the display. With dinner already finished, Robb began guiding the lot of them to the family solar, no doubt to begin debating titles and sketching out sigils in charcoal. Unfortunately, despite the warm reception of Robert's announcement at the feast, Jon was undecided on his new house but swore to make a final decision by the end of the year. It was peculiar to see his wife, Bran, Arya and Rickon buttoned up into a practical, sturdy wheelhouse, a gift from Lord Marndale that had been mostly unused but was still in fine shape, all prepared to depart for their grandfather's seat. Their baggage was secured and their guard was arrayed. Stannis had taken the still-breathing body of Robert Arryn and the weakened Jon Arryn with him to the docks of White Harbour, while Lysa and Baelish were being taken in smaller, separate wagons under watchful Tully and Baratheon guard. Prince Joffrey and his uncles had kept to themselves since the arrest, though Ned had caught more than one disparaging comment from the prince about nearly everything in the north. An ungrateful gold shit Robb had called him after yet another mocking drawl in the yard. He was glad that the Kingslayer was at hand to keep his misbegotten spawn in check. The direwolves carried his children's dislike and rarely permitted the prince's presence for long. He'd debated with his wife about bringing the wolves, but since only more would be coming to King's Landing and the older beast was well behaved, he permitted it. Riverrun was no city, and he would feel more secure if all his children were together, his children and their wolves. He kept having to correct himself. If not for his own connection to Moor, Ned doubted he'd feel so strongly for the growing pups. Green Eyes rarely ventured far from Winterfell. She had surprised everyone by following Cat eagerly on the day of their departure, keeping Summer, Shaggy and Birina in line. Hoster's health had taken a bad turn after Lysa's arrest, but thankfully time with Caitlin and the children bolstered his spirits. Bryndon's squiring of Bran in Riverrun and Cat's extended visit had nearly caused the Lord of Riverrun to spring from his bed. Even some part of the discord with Bryndon was mended by his brother's decision to return home. Caitlin revealed to Ned Hoster's frustration with Edmure and what she suspected were his own fears of an unprepared and ill-equipped heir. The rest of their noble guests would be returning home, with only Smalljon, Aelys and Daisy remaining to attend the coming celebrations at Last Hearth. Sansa had also invited Marie and Bourne. Somehow word of the gathering had spread to Val, and Jon had been convinced to attend with her and accompany Sansa in Robb's place. Ned bid farewell and took one last look at Robb and Jon standing side by side. the walls of Winterfell rising at their backs. He held back his fears, the instinctual dread when he pictured crossing the neck and returning to King's Landing. His last trip south had only been to Seaguard, where Mallister ships had helped transport the Northern Army to the Iron Islands. He reminded himself that only he would be forced to enter the Crown Loans, his family would be safe and happy in Riverrun. When all this business was done, he would meet with them there before returning home. A boisterous shout rang, the royal party crawled into motion. When Winterfell's walls teetered on the horizon behind them, Ned heard a distant horn call and thoughts of war pooled in his stomach. Forward slash 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 forward slash. Robert had little patience for the tedium of the road or the lack of wine. He nearly insisted on stopping at every inn along the road, but reminders of Jon Arryn waiting in King's Landing helped curb the worst of his habits. Mercifully, Robert paid little attention to the rest of their party, preferring to ride and talk with Ned and Sir Barristan. This allowed Ned to keep his wife and children surrounded by Tully and Stark men, secluded from the Lannisters. Ned weathered Robert's constant complaints and moans, his utter disdain for anything aside from hunting or the thrill of old wars. He learned of rumblings from the Stepstones and the rise in pirate raids that Stannis had been working hard to quell. Jon Arryn had suspected support from the disputed lands. The king was cohesive enough to share his plans, or at least the beginnings of plans, for the crown's records to be audited. Baelish was obviously no longer in royal favor, and amongst his possessions a small coded account book had been found. Maester Lewin had taken a brief look and was able to discern that it contained a complicated list of transactions. To who and from where, was unknown. Considering the dire straits of the royal treasury, any chance to recoup lost or stolen gold was made a priority. Their travels passed by the nearly completed Wolfswood Canal, which prompted a surprisingly insightful question from Sir Barristan. Lord Stark, the King's Guard asked, "Now that your earthwork is done, what shall be done with the men? I know that coin, food and stone is still to be provided for another year, but will they not grow idle?" Ned shook his head. "Your worry is justified, Sir Barristan. Thankfully, with the aid from the Crown, the Roynish architects have been contracted for another 2 projects." Sir Barristan and Brynden both were surprised by this. "Which houses have decided to follow in your steps?" Brynden asked. "House Umber wishes to try and connect the last river to Long Lake," Ned explained, "while House Dustin is seeking to connect the east and west arms of the Salt Spear. I also suspect that the Karstarks are toying with an inlet from the Greymouth farther into their own lands." Sir Barristan smiled. "I have not heard of such industrious projects in many years. The last I think was when the Redwynes and Targaryens rebuilt the shipyards at the Arbor and Dragonstone, during King Jaehaerys' reign. With more work, the laborers and their families shall be divided between the 2 projects. Less manpower means each new canal will take longer, but thankfully the wages will help grow both Torrens Square and Last Hearth's markets." Ned commented. "It is too early to say how many of the Southrons will stay, but I hope at least a portion can be swayed to settle here. Foresight is a rare gift among the lords of Westeros," Lord Stark Sir Barristan complimented. Gradually, the hills and prairies of the Barrowlands gave way to the soft marshes of the Neck. Ned took a moment to appreciate the sight of the Merman's Road, which parted from the main road a few leagues north of Moat Cailin, heading east for the Silver Bridge at White Harbour. It was somewhat embarrassing to see the well-maintained road in comparison to the King's Road. The passage narrowed as they neared the ancient fortress of Moat Cailin. As ever, Ned felt a strange longing at the broken and demolished towers, the sunken battlements and decayed gates. Ned turned in his horse to Bran and Arya, who were leaning out of the wheelhouse window and staring in rapt attention at the moat. "What do you 2 think?" Ned asked. Arya frowned. Born's stories made it sound stronger. Bran nodded along. "I guess I thought it'd be more intact, like when Blue King Leos tried to invade." Ned struggled to recall that particular battle. He thought it was one of the early Andal warlords. The moat had seen hundreds of armies fall to the towers on the causeway. Born once said he could have filled a library just on the dead lords whose bones laid beneath the swamps of the Neck. He continued listening to his children expound the many feats of the moat when it was garrisoned by kings of winter, marsh kings and even red kings. Speaking of ancient armies, their party had passed the camps of Northmen a few leagues back, near the edge of the solid ground. Latrines, makeshift stables and supply trains were being carefully prepared. His riders had been told the lords were taking quarters in the moat itself. Ned pointed to the collection of large banners that indicated the moat was occupied. "Can you tell me whose banners fly above the fortress?" Arya rattled off the sigils quickly. "The axe and crown are the Dustins, the keys are the locks, the grey hand is the Flints of Flint's fingers and the flayed man is the Bolton's." Bran exclaimed, "Father, does that mean Lord Bolton is here?" "Very good, Arya." "I'm unsure, Bran. I know not who the houses have sent to lead their forces. There's a good chance the Dreadfort's men will be led by a cousin or perhaps a trusted captain," Ned replied. What he kept to himself was the sheer shock of the numbers he saw arrayed in the field. If you weren't used to the arrangement of army camps, it could be deceiving how many soldiers were preparing to follow them into the Riverlands. In fear of a lackluster muster, Ned had called upon 100 swords and 50 riders primarily from Sewin and Condon. At a guess, he would say the Boltons alone brought nearly 200 horsemen and more infantry beside that. Perhaps Ned had underestimated how intensely the lords and ladies would be vying for Stark favor. Robert had given a passing look at the soldiers, but a word from Sir Brynden had him more focused on the promise of wine and a soft bed for the night. Ned turned and called out to Lord Kevan Condon, Sir Kyle Condon and Garrus Sewin, the commanders he selected for his own troops. He had requested Lord Meager remain at Castle Sewin should Robb need support, and instead had brought Meager's nephew, Garrus, in his stead. Promptly, the Stark men were ordered to make camp closer to the other Northmen. Lord Kevan and Lord Garrus would swiftly take the lay of the land while Ned dealt with the lords. Inside the walls of Moat Cailin, Ned noticed the lizard lion of House Reed was hoisted. Could Howland have come from Greywater Watch? He'd received no word before leaving Winterfell. A knot of fur-cloaked men and women stood together on the rough cobblestone of the gatehouse tower. At the royal herald's cry they broke apart into a rough line and kneeled as one. Unlike at Winterfell, the king gave little attention to the lords and ladies beyond a ceremonial greeting. Robert lumbered past them, eager to rest, leaving Ned to greet his subjects. Lady Barbary appeared regal as ever. To her left stood a bald man in well-fitted chainmail. His tabard depicted a white skeleton on a green field, holding a golden hoe in one hand and a circlet in the other. To her right was a younger man with similar colouring to herself, wearing a cloak proudly bearing the Ryswell horse head. Lady Dustin, Ned greeted. "Lord Stark, Barrow Hall has answered your call," Barbary responded. 100 horses and 60 swords are yours to command." She gestured to her companions. "My brother, Ricard Ryswell, and Lord John O'Sfarrow are at your disposal." Next was the weathered and door-faced Donal Locke, heir to Oldcastle, with a few distant cousins at his back. Ned was quite familiar with Donal, as he had taken over the vast majority of duties from the elderly and infirm Lord Locke. "Lord Stark, 90 riders and 80 swordsmen have come at your call," Donal said. "Forgive me for being impetuous, but 2 of my cousins, Lady Eleanor and Lady Elera, accompanied me. If you would permit, they would be pleased to attend to your wife and daughter for their time in the south." The 2 Locks in question were of age with Caitlin. It was a blatant move to insert a relative into his household, and by proposing it away from Winterfell, it left Ned with little alternatives but to accept or dismiss the request. Neither the Carstark or Tallheart matrons had been able to accompany them this time, so Cat was making do with a select few maids. Her hesitance at accepting a northern lady-in-waiting had been a sore spot for them over the last year. Hopefully, she would allow the Locks to ease her into the idea. Ned agreed and would seek out Caitlin to see if the 2 ladies were fit company. 2 heavily freckled flints of the Fingers greeted him with easy smiles. The Finger Flints were poorer than their kin at Widow's Watch but enjoyed steady, if modest, fortunes from their extensive coal and iron mines in the Flint Cliffs. Morrick Flint, the brother of Lord Doric Flint, was a confident enough rider but was more eager than experienced. Similarly his son, Mathis, was only a few months older than Robb. They had marshalled a mere 20 heavy cavalry but supplemented it with 110 infantry, including a number of dedicated archers that Ned knew by reputation were veterans from the Greyjoy Rebellion. At last he came to the final trio. To his shock, Lord Roose Bolton stood shoulder to shoulder with Domeric Bolton. The young heir to the Dreadfort was noticeably different from his brief visit to Winterfell 2 years ago. His pale face, so alike his father, now sported a scarred trench running from just under his left eye down, clipping away part of his lip, through his chin. It was uncommon to see such a clearly deep injury so well healed. Waiting in Domeric's shadow was a shorter fellow with a thick corned neck and a rather charming face. This stranger had a sigil sewn over his breast of a blue river with white ice atop it. In the river laid a broken star. "Lord Bolton," Ned greeted. Lord Stark Bolton calmly replied. His son watched every move nervously. Ned allowed himself a small smile and clasped arms with the Lord of Leeches. "It is good to see you, Roose." "Likewise, Ned. Congratulations on the success of your canal. Word of it has even reached the Shivering Sea," Roose told him. "You know my son, Domeric." Domeric bowed. "Lord Stark, an honor to see you again." "I'm glad to see you in good health," Ned told the boy. Before he could delicately inquire about the obvious injury, Roose interrupted. "I led 180 of my fastest horsemen and brought 100 strong men at arms." Ned barely stopped himself from shaking his head in exasperation. "I am grateful for every blade," he said instead. Roose nodded. "I thought it was appropriate that I and my son take personal command." Roose noticed Ned's eyes flicker to the stranger behind them. "This is my son's sworn sword, Allard Wispin. He fought by my side during the rebellion and he now guards my heir." The now named Wispin gave a simple bow but kept silent. Some aspects of his posture disturbed Ned, like his back was too straight or his legs were too rigid. "I'm glad to have you both here. Hopefully, my caution will amount to nothing," Ned told them. Roose and Domeric took their leave. Ned remained in the courtyard listening to the bustle of carts and men filter through. He had sent Cat and the children ahead to find rooms in the cramped tower. Moore sat calmly against his leg. Ned looked down and gently rubbed his wolf's neck, which came up to his ribs. He heard the rustle of footsteps before Lord Reed emerged from a door leading to the battlements. "Howland!" Ned exclaimed, and rushed forward to hug his friend. Howland Reed was a small man wearing bronze scale armor and a green leather cloak. His face had a patch of wrinkles between his eyes and a short ruddy beard. The Lord of Greywater Watch was also leaning lightly on a cane, as memento from the Tower of Joy. "Ned, it's wonderful to see you," Howland replied, returning the embrace. They took a few minutes to just enjoy their reunion, examining the changes time had brought out in them. There was a feeling of relief and happiness that had become absent from the reunion with Robert. "I hope your family received my gifts," Ned said. Nilsa was excited to try out the new cloth. Of course Mira appreciated the trident and Hojan was quite taken by the instruments, Howland informed him. Walking side by side, Howland led Ned into a small antechamber that likely once served as a guard post. A table with salt, fish and bread had been laid out. Ned sank into the chair and ate a few quick bites, famished from the ride. Howland took a moment to watch Ned feed Moore a whole fish. "I cannot tell you how shocked I was when the news came," Howland said. "About the direwolves?" Howland tore off a chunk of bread. "I knew a pack was found beyond the wall, but I had no clue the Great Shepherd was planning on sending them to Winterfell." Ned raised an eyebrow. "It seemed there was to be no careful wording between them. Why did you never say anything about the shepherds? To me or Lyanna? I did not know you, either of you, very well, despite your kindness." Many of the more devout houses were inclined to believe the Starks did know of the shepherds and were deliberately spurning them. It seemed more realistic than the loss of knowledge completely. Then again Howland speculated, perhaps your father did know but simply shared his grandfather's distaste. Lord Ricard's eyes were always pointed southwards, the shepherds were likely a lesser concern. "I'm fairly certain I've fully turned from that path," Ned quipped. Howland smiled. "I think so. Are there any shepherds among your kin?" "My grandmother and my uncle both went to Skagos. They returned to raise their families in the Neck." Howland explained that for many years, Greywater Watch had served as a haven and messenger post for shepherds across the north. They had even trained their own ravens to travel between other posts. Howland and Torrin Wolftongue were distant acquaintances. Ned wondered, "I expected to only find some of your people working on the foundations. Why didn't you warn me of your arrival?" "I hadn't planned on coming, but 2 nights ago, Hojan came to me." He was incensed. Howland looked out the door, taking in the clouds and the slight damp smell of the bog. "My son is a calm soul, he dreams and that gives him a confidence you don't find in normal children. That night he was shaken, disturbed by whatever he had seen. He begged me to come meet you, To warn you. Ned was frowning heavily. Warn me. About the south. I'm already wary. That's why I called for such a strong escort. Howland got up and shut the chamber door, allowing more to come in and lay by their table. He barred it, then leant over the table and whispered. Hojan said that summer was ending. He saw a great mirror shatter and the shards flew like crow wings across Westeros. Wolves are dancing with giants and laughing with bears, when they should be alone. He said a crown of bronze that should have shrunk and shattered, instead shined anew. My son said the wall was shaking and only a great howl could halt its crumble. Ned was frozen, trying to absorb the strange words. His mind lingered on that last declaration. The old gods had touched the boy with a warning. Could Hojan Reed have seen the coming darkness? The pact with Mance Rayder was still a closely guarded secret, not even Robb or Catelyn knew of it yet. Ned Howland begged, Hojan no longer sees clearly. His dreams are muddied and flakes like soaked bark. Please, what do you know? A cloud passed in front of the sunlight that was streaming through the barracks' lone window. The room darkened, the single candle bloomed. For a split second, Ned noticed his reflection in Howland's eyes. A long-haired man, with a face of regal stone and a heavy brow, bathed in crimson candlelight and flickering shadows that seemed to form a crown. Howland, Ned said, the long night comes. Forward slash 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 forward slash. Notes. A forward slash n, Howland makes an appearance. As you can tell, and some of you did point out, the last chapter was a bit of a short one. I tried and failed twice to write a satisfying, detailed version of Baelish's arrest before I just gave up and rewrote the whole chapter. That's why it seemed so rushed, since I felt it was better to try and capture just how quickly the entire situation got out of hand. We're now on our way south and I'm still working on how to balance Ned's time in King's Landing and Jon, Robb and Sansa in the north. Would you prefer we just follow Ned for the rest of the arc, then once I've wrapped his part up, go back in time and find out what's been going on in Winterfell? Let me know. Chapter 32, The Greedy Lion. Chapter text. Days streamed together, punctuated by his children's excitement at their first time south of the Neck. Catelyn especially enjoyed showing off the natural beauty of the Riverlands to Arya and Bran. The King's Road was in no better condition here. Rather than cracked stone from the melted ice, the path dipped and sunk around oxbows and hills. Hoster had agreed to take the longer route down to the Trident, allowing Ned more time with his family. They passed by the twins at a distance. Everyone agreed that avoiding the late Lord Free was preferable to a shorter path to Riverrun. Near the inn at the crossroads, Ned hugged his children goodbye and kissed away Cat's tears. They'd each send letters after reaching their destinations. Cat promised to keep him informed of Bran's squireship and whatever misadventures Arya found. He watched solemnly as the Tully caravan pulled farther and farther west until he and the Northmen were left to catch up with the king. They rode south, through lands that still held distant memories for Ned. The hulking form of Harrenhal was an ever-present spectre. The burnt husk of Harren the Black's castle cast a shadow over his heart. A contrast to the peaceful vista of the God's Eye beside it. Even at a great distance, Ned felt some stirring for the Isle of Faces. The mysterious weirwood heart of Westeros. Howland had gone there before that fateful tourney so many decades ago, and the last reported sighting of Lyanna had been near the lake itself. Perhaps in a more peaceful year, Ned would make his pilgrimage. Their arrival at King's Landing was no grand celebration. It was a sharp contrast for all the Northmen who had fought in the rebellion, who had briefly seen nothing but a ruined city clogged with smoke and corpses. They took the direct route through the streets and saw large sections of poorly constructed buildings. The city had not remained the smoking ruin the sack had created. Following Robert into the Red Keep, Ned made arrangements for his soldiers at two separate barracks. One in the docks and one near the Street of Steel. Ned stationed 200 personal guards in the castle proper. The remaining royals greeted them at the castle doors. Renly and Stannis stood apart from the Queen and royal children. Robert gave his family a brief greeting before running off for a drink, followed closely by Queen Cersei. She greeted Ned with perfect politeness before absconding with Prince Joffrey. Stannis informed him that Savardis Egan had arrived with the Arryn household guard, and Jon Arryn was already under the care of Grand Maester Pycelle. Ned was left behind to coordinate the imprisonment of Lysa and Baelish. They took Baelish down to the red cells, just one level above the black cells. He would be uncomfortable but less likely to expire before his trial. The treacherous nobleman would stand before his judges in the next few weeks, once Jon Arryn was well enough to act as a witness. Lysa was escorted to a comfortable cell in the maiden vault, giving little resistance other than quiet begging to see her son. Taking one last breath of foul air, Ned followed Stannis into the castle. // Unable to have two hands, Robert appointed Ned as advisor to the king, which allowed him to assist Stannis in many duties. Robert preoccupied himself with planning his next feast, leaving Stannis and Ned to rule in his absence. The tale of Lysa's arrest and Jon Arryn's collapse was being shared widely throughout the keep. Half-heard retellings and personal bias had muddied the details. Ned was called upon by Sir Egon a week after his arrival. Jon Arryn had finally awoken. He slipped quietly into the temporary quarters, past the Arryn guards standing at attention. Jon was propped up on his pillows and was squinting at a stack of letters in his lap. The old lord looked up slowly at Ned and weakly smiled. "Ned, so good to see you." Ned sat by the bedside. "It's even better to see you awake, Jon," he said. His foster father rubbed his chest, taking deep, careful breaths. "I've not felt this tired since the march to the Trident," he confessed. "Rest will do you some good. Stannis and I have taken matters in hand," Ned told him. "I'm glad House Baratheon has you to support them. Have you met with the small council?" Ned grimaced. "Only once, at Stannis' insistence. Not the most prestigious group, I'll be the first to admit. Especially now that Baelish's corruption has been laid bare for all to see." Jon frowned. Robert has yet to name a replacement. Stannis delegated his former duties as Master of Ships to a commander from the Royal Navy, and Renly is not nearly as attentive as I would like, Ned complained. Not to mention Lord Varys talking in circles and Viserys for minutes on end. Honestly, the state of the small council was deplorable. It was a wonder that Jon Arryn had been able to keep the kingdom running at all. "What duties has Stannis handed off to you?" Jon asked. "Mostly the ordering of the city's supplies, maintaining order between the tax collectors, guarding the gates, and coordinating with the gold cloaks. I'm ill-equipped to mediate disputes between the court," Ned explained. "I'm ignorant of the unspoken rules and history." Jon leaned a comforting hand on Ned's arm. "King's Landing is rifer with corruption, secret dealings, and dangerous whispers than any place in Westeros. It's very different from acting as Lord Paramount of your own lands." Ned shook his head. "Unspoken agreements and careful words are not new to me. The North has its own politics, no matter what you Southrons think. Yet it baffles me how little reputation and words mean. Stannis told me that 3 different Crown land houses petitioned to renegotiate their taxes based on blighted crops just last year. Now we've received words that blight never existed. Of course, Baelish handled the matter, throwing the whole thing under suspicion. I would have seen them punished to the full extent of the law, but Stannis and the rest of the council agreed to only a small fine. In the North, such a decision would have me swarmed by these lords' neighbors demanding more severe measures." "It is the way of things," Jon replied. "The crown bears a different weight for its decisions. If Robert was seen taking these 3 lords to task for their deception, the rest of the kingdom would wonder if he sought to punish all such evasions. That could lead to much more trouble in the long run. Instead, the offenders receive a small fine now. Still, the next Master of Coin will ensure that merchants doing business in the Crown lands know exactly who to blame for their raised tariffs." Ned thought that secrecy and skirting the word of the law helped no one in this matter. In this case, it would imply the Crown was weak, that 3 lords had gotten away with cheating their king. Then again, Robert was a first among equals. Unlike Ned or Jon, who undisputedly stood above their lords. Looking back towards the door, Ned wished he'd brought more along, but the wolf had been taken out of the city by Lord Condon to stretch his legs. Ned leaned close and whispered, "The great matter is still in contention. I've convinced Stannis to hold until the matter with Lysa and Baelish has been resolved." Jon nodded in thanks and looked out the window in thought. Ned loathed to bring up the state of young Robin. The boy was still unresponsive despite the attentions of 3 different maesters. No noise or sensation stirred him from sleep, and his already frail form was beginning to waste away. Ned doubted John was unaware of his son's fate, nor the heavy burden he now bore to ensure that a new successor was chosen for the Vale. Their discussion continued for another hour before the lumbering steps of the king came to the room. Robert burst in, giddy at the sight of John's recovery. He insisted they hold a feast to celebrate the hand's return. Grand Maester Pycelle followed in his wake and conveyed that John Arryn was in no state to take up his duties. No less enthused, Robert gave his foster father a hearty shake and went off to taste test wines. Ned bid John farewell and left to ensure that Robert's feasting plans were delayed as long as possible. // More weeks passed. Ned fell awkwardly into his role. Neither he nor Stannis was as generous as other courtiers. The entire Red Keep swam in discomfort but gradual acceptance. If nothing else, the capital was running smoothly again. A letter from Cat described Bran's first time hitting the training mark with a lance and Arya's newfound fascination with learning to sail from her uncle Ed Muir. His reply contained some anecdotes about the Red Keep and a sadly sparse update on Lysa's condition. She was permitted to spend the afternoons with her son, though it did little to better her mood. Ned hurried to make his last appointment for the day, a small luncheon with Desmond Redwyne and Loras Tyrell. The Tyrells kept a small presence at court. Loras Tyrell accompanied Renly and rarely oversaw business for his family. For the last 2 years, the Reach's representative was Sir Desmond, a cousin of Lord Redwyne. From what Ned could gather, Sir Desmond held no official position in the capital. Nonetheless, he held the authority of Mace Tyrell among the Reachmen seeking to do business with the crown. Roose had keenly pointed out that not only was Desmond related to Mace Tyrell by blood through Lady Olenna, but his wife was also Lady Tyrell's sister, making him Mace's good brother. The Tyrells had undoubtedly knotted themselves closely to the Hightowers and Redwynes. Ned doubted the House of the Golden Rose would ever forget that they ruled by the grace of the Conqueror and not their blood. In one of the private gardens that dotted the Red Keep, Ned arrived with Roose and Ricard Ryswell at the appointed time. Sitting around a table already enjoying full goblets of Arbor Gold sat young Loras, the ginger-haired Desmond and Lord Renly. Ned said, astonished to see the Master of Laws sitting between the two Reachmen. Renly raised a glass. Lord Stark. So good to see you and your companions, of course. He stood and filled more cups. Please sit. Roose sat stone-faced, letting Ned take the lead while Ricard enjoyed the wine. Ned did notice the young Ryswell took long drinks, but only a sip of wine passed his lips. Barbary was already instructing him in her own brand of negotiating. My thanks, Ned said. I was unaware that you would be joining us, Lord Renly. Renly smiled again, wider and wider. Did his grin have no end? Loras mentioned it yesterday, and I felt compelled to attend in Robert's stead. After all, we wouldn't want any arguments breaking out, least of all now, Renly explained. Ned's stomach began to loop in on itself. Was Loras really that comfortable inviting another lord into a private meeting? If Sir Desmond allowed this, what could that mean for Renly's relationship to the Tyrells? Stannis detested them and preferred to spurn them in his small ways. Robert himself wasn't fond of the flowers either. Why would the last brother cleave from his family on this matter? That comment about arguments was peculiar as well. If Ned had been sitting down alone, he could very well have wound himself up like a wheel trying to keep his thoughts and words straight. Thankfully, at his side were two men equally unhappy for the sudden intrusion. Lord Redwyne, I must compliment you on the drinks. We rarely enjoy southern wine at home. I was wondering if you had any suggestions on a good vintage to take back north with me. Ricard cut in. Sir Desmond leaned forward. I'd be happy to send for a fine barrel from our stores. I don't think we've been introduced. Ricard laughed, his boyish charm in full effect, and turned to Ned. Of course, my apologies, Lord Stark, I spoke out of turn. Ned smiled. No matter, this is not so formal a meeting that we must stand on ceremony. May I introduce Roose Bolton, Lord of the Dread Fort, and Ricard Ryswell, heir to Barrowtown. Desmond's eyebrows rose at Ricard's title while Loras and Renly were eyeing Roose cautiously. Speaking of wine, Ned announced. Sir Desmond, Sir Loras, I called this meeting to broach the topic of shifting certain trade routes between the Reach and the North. Desmond's relaxed smile couldn't hide his alert gaze while Laura settled back, seemingly bored now that the conversation had moved on. As I understand it, trade through White Harbor has been steady for nearly a decade, Desmond pointed out. That is true, but the North will soon be transporting more goods than ever before down to our coasts, Ned said. Desmond ran a finger over his rings, a bold assertion. Lord Stark, does this newfound stream of trade have anything to do with your newly completed canal? Ned resisted the urge to snap his eyes to Renly. Instead, Roose did it for him, and Renly's glowing smile strained. Already, Robert's brother had spilled the details of the trip to others. Yes, Ned replied. The Wolfswood Canal is complete, and last I heard, 2 of the new water mills had been completed, with another 2 beginning construction. Lumber is always a needed import, though I would think that our existing agreements sufficiently cover our needs, Desmond countered. Truthfully, it was the paper and furs from Barrowtown that I wished to speak of, Ned corrected. Now that piqued Sir Desmond's mind. The knight hesitated, then stroked his rings again, slowly. I was unaware that Barrowtown exported such things in great volume. Very few of our merchants do business past Fair Isle. The Riverlands and Westerlands are regular visitors there. Our ships prefer the eastern routes. The Wolfswood is the first, but not the last canal underway. House Tallheart has already begun plans to connect Torrens Square to Barrowtown, Ned outlined. Then the wealth of your forests shall be open to them. I wonder where the paper factors into it. Desmond asked. Roose hummed, bringing the table's attention to his pale eyes. The Citadel's supplies are in high demand, and shipments take time to reach us. The Dreadfort's lands are rich in sheep. My looms shall send the cloth to the mills, and from there, we shall send the paper by barge. In truth, shipping parchment and paper was expensive regardless of whether you bought from the Reach or the Riverlands. The North currently bought its writing supplies from several different sources. With the mills already being built, Roose had brought up a proposition to shift production locally. Ned surmised that the Dreadfort and the Weeping Water were ill-suited for a canal, so Roose was looking to embed himself in the turn of fortunes any way he could. Domeric had let slip he'd be returning to Barrowtown to serve his Aunt Barbary, and he'd been thick as thieves with Ricard the whole trip. Desmond drummed on the table. You said the Wolfswood will have 4 new mills. If Desmond realized that the North would save costs on importing writing supplies, the Reach would lose a steady income stream. Hopefully, he would understand that Ned was offering Highgarden an opportunity to make up for this loss with first rights to a new lucrative route along the western coast. Ned nodded, and with every cleared grove, we will have more land for pasture. Ricard chimed in, Barrowtown may never rival White Harbor's great docks, but I assure you, sir, Lady Dustin is already planning for much-needed expansions. Desmond paused to open a fine ledger embossed with a rose. Small, crisp writing filled the pages. And what would you be seeking from the Reach, Lord Stark? Renly asked. It was a question bordering on rudeness, especially coming from a lord with no investments in the dealings. If Renly was not the king's brother, Ned might have insisted he leave. The North would like to increase food shipments over the next year and negotiate new long-term winter rates, Ned told him. Laura's laughed, but Desmond just looked up from his ledger with a tight grip on his quill. Winter prices. Renly clarified. Lord Stark, I know it's been many years since you came south, but as you can see, the Baratheon swept his arm out over the lush garden bathed in dew and sunlight. Summer is still here. A long summer means a long winter, Roose corrected. Can Northmen divine the future now? Laura's quipped, though it earned no humor from Ned. There are many signs known to my people, the length of the ice on the shivering sea, the measurements of snow taken on the Crook Peaks, the barrels filled by the weeping of the wall. Ned listed a few examples. I can say with confidence that summer is ending. Autumn is upon us, and it shall be short. Ned had no way of predicting the exact month the snow would begin to fall. The Stark histories had collected hundreds of different indicators from houses across the north. Most families relied on 1 or 2 methods to guess at winter's approach. Ned and Lewin had painstakingly amalgamated as many as they could find. Even now, Rob would be receiving letters from shepherds and minor lords with details and reckonings to add more evidence and forecasting. Regardless of their responses, the warning from the wall was final. A long winter loomed. Ned needed links to the south, links bound by word, ink, coin, and blood, if necessary. Well, I have my own signs, and by my reckoning, it is time for some food," Renly proclaimed, then stood to order from the kitchens, Laura's in tow. Desmond shook his head, then set his ledger down, a new page titled with their names and a date. Some small scribbles already laid in the margins, naming Barrowtown, Torrens Square, and the Dread Fort. "Pay no mind to Lord Renly, he may be a friend of Lord Mace, but he doesn't dictate matters of trade. House Tyrell will doubtlessly be interested in enlarging food shipments. Besides that, who else would know better about winter than a Stark? If the cold winds do come, I can guarantee that Cousin Paxter will be eager for quality northern furs." They debated terms and figures, throwing proposals back and forth. It would take weeks of careful bargaining to settle on the final prices. Ned would arrange for representatives to sail